It was the dawn of the third age of man, a decade after the Earth-Minbari War. The Babylon Project was a dream given form. Its goal was to prevent another war by creating a place where humans and aliens could peacefully resolve their differences. A port of call, a home away from home for diplomats, swindlers, entrepreneurs, and wanderers. Among 2.5 million tons of metal, separating from the cosmic darkness. It may be dangerous here, but it is our last and best hope for peace. A hope that has never been more threatened. The year is 2258. The setting is Babylon 5. From behind the planet's enormous disk, illuminated by the rays of the local star, a huge 8-kilometer space station majestically floated out. Babylon 5 is the fifth of the eponymous series of space structures. On the observation deck, located in its upper part, immediately above the main docking gateway, stood an elderly man dressed in the uniform of the Earth's space fleet. There were no demonstration flights or any significant astronomical phenomena expected at the moment, so it might have looked like he was just standing there looking at the stars. But he was deep in thought. Babylon Chap 1, the first station of the project, founded almost immediately after the Earth-Minbari War. It was never completed. A powerful explosion destroyed the supporting structures, and the station was destroyed. Babylon 2. The second station was laid down just a year after the first, in the same region of space. And again, failure. Multiple acts of sabotage and terrorism led to the cessation of construction. Babylon 3. Unprecedented security measures were taken to prevent any surprises during construction, but not even half finished. Babylon 3 was destroyed by a powerful explosion of a thermonuclear reactor that unexpectedly went beyond all the limits of the calculated operating modes. People were not discouraged. And Babylon 4 was finally completed. The surviving parts of the previous stations in the series were used in the construction, but a day before the grand opening of the station, Babylon 4 simply disappeared, as if it had never been there. It disappeared along with the crew that had managed to arrive, the construction teams that remained at the station, and the guests who had flown in for the opening. And here at last is Babylon 5, built in another corner of space. In orbit around an uninhabited planet, the station continued to exist peacefully, despite the most dire predictions of all sorts of homegrown prophets. But why did Jeffrey Sinclair, the commander of this station, feel more and more every day that the station was about to go to hell, following the example of its predecessors? Pessimism? Maybe. But maybe it was just a premonition. A series of bright white flashes made Commander Sinclair turn his gaze to the left corner of the observation window. There, barely visible against the background of stars, hung the transition zone. A group of 4 cylinders more than a kilometer long, forming a semblance of a gate, serving as an entry and exit point from hyperspace. The picture, in general, was ordinary. Babylon 5 served as an international transit point and trading post at the intersection of space routes, so the activation of the transition zone occurred here a dozen times a day. But now something was wrong. Flashes of light signaling the activation of the transition zone by some ship, as expected, passed along the guide cylinders, meeting in the center of the zone delimited by them. But the funnel of the entrance to hyperspace did not open, and the shining star of energy in the center of the zone flared brightly for a moment and went out. What the? Commander Sinclair came closer to the window plane in surprise, raising his hand with the communicator to his mouth. Lieutenant Ivanova? Yes, sir, a female voice said. Did you see this? Yes, Commander, the transition zone was activated from the other side. The standard signal for the funnel to initialize. Energy was accumulated for opening, and then everything was over, as if it had never happened. But how is this possible? After all, I can't know, sir. The accumulated energy, the one-time release of which, by the way, would have been enough to scatter Babylon 5 throughout the local system, simply disappeared. Dissipated into space without a trace. Some ship didn't pass, there wasn't enough energy to exit. According to the sensors, the impulse would be enough for a Narn heavy cruiser to pass through. This is something else. Damn it, sir. Look, Sinclair looked up at the transition zone again and saw another series of flashes of energy accumulation. But this time the star in the center glowed a little longer, and the light on the station flickered for a moment. Ivanova? The pulse power has increased by 20%. The source is still unclear. I'm going to the bridge. Jeffrey Sinclair almost ran from the observation deck, literally flying into the elevator. 3 minutes later, he was already entering the station's command center. During his journey, the lighting flickered once more, and the floor beneath his feet trembled slightly, forcing him to tensely grip the handrails in the elevator. What's here, Lieutenant? Commander Sinclair. There was another pulse. 150% of nominal power. At the moment the funnel should have opened, the sensors detected a gravity fluctuation of 3%. Damn it. If this goes on, the station will fall apart. Commander, again! The voice of one of the operators was heard, intensely peering at the sensor readings. A series of flashes, this time so bright that it was painful to watch, passed through the cylinders of the transition zone again. But this time, the final spark of energy did not go out, shining like a small sun. A siren howled at the station, warning people of danger, and the colossal structure shook from end to end. Sir, this is impossible. Lieutenant Ivanova looked in amazement at the monitor screen, which displayed the readings of the space tracking sensors. But dozens of transition zones are forming around the station. What? Is this an attack? No, sir. The craters are tiny, a couple of meters in diameter. Not even a fighter can get through. They appear and disappear around Babylon 5. What the hell is this? Somewhere in the gray sector. The place was dark and dismal. Anyone who found themselves here, be it human or alien, described this place as deep ass. It was a slum, a part of the station that had not received the necessary funding during its construction, and therefore looked like the filthy sewage of a large metropolis, except that it was dry. In one of the nooks, which according to the design was clearly supposed to be a cabin, a shining stroke appeared right in the air with the quiet crack that made the bones themselves vibrate, opening up into a rapidly rotating funnel. The airflow scattered trash, some leaflets and rags around the cabin, and from the gap in space, silvery sand spilled onto the floor, forming an impressive pile. As soon as the last grain of sand fell out, the funnel collapsed and silence reigned in the room. An attentive observer, if he were nearby, could notice that the grains of sand, which at first lay motionless, began to flow with a quiet rustle to the center of the pile. Time after time crumbling again, as if something was trying to mold a figure from this sand, but could not hold the parts together. After a while, the sand finally managed to gather itself together, taking the form of a humanoid, moreover a man dressed in a strange black suit, glittering with metal. The creature looked around in surprise, shook its head, as if trying to come to its senses, froze for a few seconds without moving, boring into space with an unseeing gaze, and then bent down and picked up something from the floor. This something turned out to be a metal piece of a cooling system pipe, obviously broken off by the previous inhabitant and used as a weapon. The alien brought the pipe to his eyes and, with an unreadable expression on his frozen, wax-like face, watched as the metal crumpled, flowed, and disappeared completely behind his clenched fingers. When he opened his hand, there was a small metal plate lying on his palm. Chapter 1. Slipped, fell, woke up in a cast. Every Dark Lord must have a professional psychiatrist who will treat him for all unusual phobias and non-standard behavior that can interfere with his plans. Dark Lord Rule 64, so I'm a replicator, unexpected. The memory was still in disarray. The disorder of memories caused almost physical discomfort. It felt like a blatant incorrectness that needed to be corrected immediately. But gradually it passed, and the data lined up into two sets of independent memories. The first was emotional, bright, chaotic, and vague, like an old video camera film with defects in some frames. The second was described in one word: logic. Clear information, structured databases, and even an extremely effective algorithm for restoring damaged areas. I was the third. The third humanoid replicator, created after my younger brothers studied the body of the android Reese, the creator of our species. And at the same time, I was a human from the planet Earth, in a world where the Stargate series existed, in particular, telling the story of those very replicators and their fate. And I had no idea how this was possible, or what had happened. I only knew that it was something. Definitely. Equally inexplicable, both from the point of view of a human and from the point of view of a replicator. The third's memory ended at the moment he was destroyed by falling into the event horizon of a black hole. Human memory, on the contrary, did not contain anything similar to the moment of death or transference. I could not remember anything at all about what I did the last day, week, month. In fact, I could not even decide which of the human memories were the last, as if someone had carefully erased any links to dating for several years of life. At the same time, I could say with absolute certainty that it was the human personality that was now dominant. Or rather, it was the human personality that became the basis of the new personality matrix of this, platform, and the third's personality code was completely destroyed, leaving only a set of knowledge. A set that I can easily use, as the junior replicator block in my hand clearly demonstrates. The surge of emotions generated by these discoveries subsided as quickly as it had begun to build. Or rather, I realized with my mind that I should be experiencing simply fantastic bewilderment, shock, fear, and many other options. But in practice, all the emotions were somehow in the background. I could immerse myself in them if I wanted, but I could also ignore them, as if they were both mine and, at the same time, had nothing to do with me. Lowering my hand again, I picked up a piece of some detail from the floor, something like a valve, and again activated its transformation into a universal replicator block. It was as easy and natural as rubbing your fingers together. Only if there you can only imagine what kind of work the muscles do. Then here I knew, saw, felt, and controlled perfectly well what and how the nanites of my body were doing. An amazing feeling. And very pleasant? The metal obediently transformed, rewarding me with data on its composition. Again, an amazing feeling, a complete, clear, and integral understanding of the information. Perhaps this is how enlightenment feels, when the mind manages to fully embrace all the details and processes of the issue being studied. And perhaps it's good that I can ignore emotions. Otherwise, I would have been in for, at a minimum, shock. At least sensory. After all, I also felt the connection between these two blocks and myself, a subspace connection. And also a mass of all kinds of radiation, from thermal to radiation, and also gravity. Lord, how blind and insignificant is the human perception of the surrounding world. Distracted from my work, I came to my senses and began to examine the place I found myself in. I was standing in the middle of a tiny, gloomy room, littered with so much garbage and mechanical debris that it seemed like a warehouse rather than a living space. Thanks to the newly acquired abilities of the replicator, I saw many things inaccessible to the human eye. I was clearly inside some kind of huge metal structure. And judging by the direction of gravity, by its slight distortion, it was more of a space station than a building on a planet. Shaking my head, I resolutely walked out of the room into the corridor, which turned out to be just as cluttered and old. Either the station was as old as the world, or I was just not in the best part of it. In any case, the plan of action was quite obvious. First, I needed to determine where I was. Considering my body's memories, it would be extremely undesirable to end up somewhere in the domain of Earthlings. They really don't like replicators. I wouldn't even have time to say hello before they destroy me. Next, it would be nice to find out what I looked like. It was difficult with no mirrors or anything that reflected. Wait, why do I need a mirror? I walked up to one of the walls in the corridor, the smoothest and cleanest of all, and slowly ran my hand along it, giving the appropriate command to my nanites. Behind my palm, there was a smooth, mirror-like strip of metal along the wall. Not the best replacement for a full-fledged mirror, but it would do for me. So, the appearance. A familiar face from the memory of the third face looked at me. Belatedly, I realized that this was indeed a built-in template left over from the previous owner of the body, when I was being assembled on the floor from scattered nanites. It was used as a basis, and I did not feel any errors in the restoration process, which meant that looking in the mirror made no sense. Moreover, everything could have been done much more simply by simply immersing myself in a kind of virtual reality of my mind, where I could model a mirror and anything at all, spending much less than a second of real time. In principle, the appearance was quite satisfactory, except that the imitation of metal inserts on the clothes could cause problems if I found myself somewhere on Earthlink territory. It could well have happened that the SG-1 team remembered this attribute of humanoid replicators and were not too lazy to share it with their compatriots. So let's not create problems for ourselves out of thin air. Obeying desire, a weak wave of transformation rolled over the clothes and all the metal inserts disappeared, leaving me in a discreet brown suit, equally inconspicuous both on Earth and on some of the Goa'uld planets. If you look closely, you can certainly notice the differences from the usual styles, but I don't need much time. As soon as I understand where I am, I will adapt to the locals, just so as not to attract attention in the first seconds. So, we've sorted out the appearance. Now I need information. There are too many questions I don't have answers to. Even the Replicator's subspace link was silent, which could mean that all my brothers had been destroyed, or that I was very far from them, somewhere in the order of intergalactic distances. So, choosing a direction at random, I walked down the corridor, looking around warily to avoid unnecessary surprises. But then, ahead I heard some chaotic sounds of meaningful life, and a minute later, turning the corner, I found myself in some kind of hall. It was much larger than the cabins I'd seen along the way and resembled something like a spontaneous market. The only difference from the Earth station analogs was the same poverty, dirt, and neglect. Although as for dirt, it depends on what you compare it to. But I saw the local inhabitants. Almost all of them did not even closely resemble people. But what was most puzzling, they did not resemble any of the races that had marked themselves in the Replicator's memory cells, but they resembled something that I, a human, had seen. Luckily, there were people here too, or at least someone who looked very much like them, and I didn't attract any attention. I guessed right about the clothes too. There were fruits in much more original styles, and there were many of those styles, from outright rags to quite civilized jackets and even waistcoats from the 17th century. At the opposite end of the room, I noticed a monitor on the wall. It was probably some kind of information board, or a communication terminal, or anything, but judging by the presence of electrical impulses, the device was operational, and that was the main thing. In principle, it would have been possible to get to the information by simply picking apart one of the walls. I felt the electromagnetic background of the wiring there too, but it would have been too noticeable, because I don't even know how often the area I found myself in is visited, and I really didn't want to start a war without even having an idea of the world around me. On the terminal, barely visible under the dirt and rust, was some kind of emblem, probably indicating the device's affiliation. It was impossible to make it out. It was too overgrown. But as soon as I approached, the monitor turned on, and I heard a quiet, static-filled female voice, and menu buttons appeared on the screen. Welcome to Earth Commonwealth Station Babylon 5. You may select a topic of interest from the list below. So that's how it is. Babylon 5 means something familiar. But let's not get distracted. I touched the screen with my finger, and the nanites carefully penetrated the terminal, connecting me directly to the station's computer system. It was damn unusual for the human basis of my personality, but the Replicator's reflexes did not allow me to get confused, and I immersed myself in the flow of new information. At the first stage, I did not touch the protected areas of the database. Reading only publicly available information, I did not want to risk attracting attention. Although I doubted that the local defense systems were superior to the Asgardian ones, this was indicated at least by the presence of wiring in the walls, because even the Goa'uld used wireless transmission of both energy and information, and they lagged behind the Grey Men by orders of magnitude. But damn it! This really is Babylon 5. That same space station, the series about which I, a human, once watched. The fifth number is a series, miraculously waiting for the end of construction, without exploding, without disappearing. And I was in the local slums, the sector of the station where the local dregs of society flocked, having found no place for themselves and no means to go home. It turned out symbolic, nothing to say. Analyzing the information I received, I feverishly found the current date. 2258. So, I can breathe a sigh of relief. There's still a year or two left before the galactic scale asshole begins. At least, as far as I remembered the series, 2258 was the very beginning. And the nastiness, as is typical of the genre, doesn't show up from the very beginning. Now, the important thing is that I'm not in the series. The aliens here won't all be speaking English. Yes, there are language bases. Now at least it will be possible to communicate with the locals if necessary. Having finished downloading the public information, I peeled myself away from the terminal. Outside, according to my internal clock, only a few seconds had passed. That's what nanotechnology means. Who's this? A rough voice came from behind me. Turning around, I saw a man who looked like a talking wardrobe, dressed in the usual rags for this sector, looming over me and slapping his palm with a thick metal pipe. I haven't seen you here, so you're new. And all newbies have to pay me for living here. Behind the local goopnik stood two more, of the same gangster appearance as their leader. Are you deaf? I'm talking to you. Mind your own business and don't bother strangers. In my previous human life, the appearance of such comrades would definitely have made me nervous. But now I just looked coldly at the speaker and turned away, getting ready to move in the direction of the visible elevator. It's hard to be afraid of a man with a club when you remember how you died in the black hole. You've gone crazy, mug. I heard behind me, and the next moment I received a blow to the back. And it's a curious feeling when your body absorbs kinetic energy. Not extinguishes, but absorbs, converting it into a useful charge distributed to power the entire volume of nanites. Actually, it is thanks to a number of similar technologies that humanoid replicators did not use personal shields. Why? If any external influence. From thermal radiation to enemy fire is a source of energy. However, let's not get distracted. You don't understand ordinary words? I turned to the attacker. I didn't want to kill them. It would inevitably make a fuss, especially in front of so many witnesses, but leaving it like that was also the wrong decision. What should I do? Aha, that's what I need. The structure and operating principles of the Zetnik dial popped into my memory. A kind of Goa'uld shocker, although the effect there was many times more complex than a regular electric discharge. It was possible to form an imitation of the Zeta in my hand from nanites. But a quick analysis of the task showed that direct copying is simply irrational. 74% of the nanites involved would go to useless work in the sense that the basic design of the weapon is simply imperfect and can be significantly improved, plus the extra volume of construction, the body, shape, arrangement of elements. It was much easier to do without a device at all, forming only the necessary blocks directly in my body. So, I raised my hand, and from the tips of my fingers, with a melodic crack, 3 paralyzing discharges struck the attackers. The people fell as if mown down, frozen without moving, and I silently turned around and nevertheless went towards the elevator, chuckling to myself that it was too similar to the ever-memorable Emperor. But there is no such thing as excessive pathos. The inhabitants of the market seemed not to notice the quickly ended scuffle, although something told me that the loser citizens would wake up already robbed blind. But the main thing is that no one else interfered with me getting to the booth in peace. Having already entered the elevator cabin and prepared to name the destination, I froze, realizing that I had absolutely no need to leave this place. I was not worried about the local criminal elements at all. I am not afraid of cold weapons at all, and energy weapons are the same. In fact, with the local technological base, I should only be afraid of ship-caliber guns. And even then, depending on the conditions, I would still think about which race's guns I should be afraid of. I would bet on the Vorlons and Shadows. Well, maybe the main caliber of the Minbari and Centauri cruisers can also cause me problems. The rest, even officially, are much less developed. Coming back out of the elevator to the market, I calmly stepped over the still motionless gopniks and, accompanied by the wary glances of the locals, moved along the corridor towards the cabins. There are advantages to staying in the slums. No one will ever look for you here. Returning to the place where I appeared, I glanced around the room. Yes, it was clearly a residential cabin, only it had never been used for its intended purpose, since even the berth mounts were smeared over. Now it was littered with various garbage and traces of intelligent life. I did not sort the garbage. Instead, having determined where the information highway passed behind the bulkhead, I put my hand there and began the process of replicating the blocks. The material of the bulkhead left much to be desired, no comparison with the trinium used by the Asgards, but this was not a problem, if necessary. A block can be formed even from the simplest iron. It took less than a minute to process the metal to the information highway, and the first replicator beetle fell at my feet. The first relative. Needless to say, for my human personality the sensation was unusual, but for the replicator one, it was pleasant. Unlike humanoids, replicator beetles do not have a full-fledged personality. They are all part of a single collective mind, acting in accordance with the goals set in the program. However, if a humanoid replicator is included in the system, then everything becomes much more interesting. A holistic, self-sufficient personality of a humanoid instantly acquires the highest command priority, allowing it to act even against the postulates of the original program, and the collective mind of younger replicators turns into additional computing power and information storage. Well, in the case when there are several humanoid replicators, the most senior one is the main one. Unable to resist, I sat down in front of the first relative and began to examine him. I knew everything about him, from the atomic composition of the material to the program code, but it was still nice to just admire the result of my work. In addition, purely as a human being, I wanted to distract myself a little from thoughts about where I ended up and what to do next. Human memory was still full of many spots and blurry pieces. I managed to restore something by associations while studying the network, but it was very insignificant. I remembered the history of this world vaguely. It seemed that some crowd of freaks from the local station management abandoned their government for some murky reason of disagreement with the policy. Either the suppression of democratic freedoms or too active adherence to the precepts of American democracy. At the same time, the same crowd managed to almost sell out to several potential enemies of the homeland at once and, while serving the state, join an international, illegal, armed formation with the goal of fighting first with one ancient civilization, the Shadows, and then with another one that helped create this formation, the Vorlons. The war was somehow won, having apparently brainwashed all the participants with the theme, "We must rejoice, no need to strain ourselves," and the ancient races happily fled, somewhere into the ass of the universe. Then there was a campaign of an already official, international, armed formation to Earth, with the goal of overthrowing the legitimate government, bringing goodness and justice, forcing everyone to live the way these freaks think is right. After which the most important of them becomes the president of something like a galactic UN, and literally 6 months later allows the genocide of the population of the Earth by some crowd of thugs from the Gateway, who used to be small stooges for the Shadows, but now wanted to show everyone how cool they are. Then they fought with someone else, beat someone, threw someone, and in the epilogue they reported that all people turned into fireflies wearing the armor of the Brotherhood of Steel from Fallout and also fled into the same ass of the universe. In general, the future does not inspire enthusiasm. I couldn't give myself over to contemplation entirely after all. There are some downsides to being a replicator, but oh well. I hand over to the younger one a list of tasks and priorities which basically boil down to a simple postulate. Reproduce without attracting attention, and get up. I still didn't even know approximately the capabilities of the Vorlons, and they are very interested in this station. Besides, I vaguely remembered that they use organic technologies, which makes the usual method of struggle for replicators very dubious. And besides, which could not help but cause additional nerves, they were suspiciously similar to the Ascended from the Stargate universe. Not to mention the Shadows and the other ancient races. It is clear that it is a simple coincidence. But it was better to be safe than sorry. So, it is not worth eating the hull, turning on the siren for the entire galaxy. But it makes sense to feel the closed sections of the service system. Fortunately, access to the information highway was already open. Interlude. The spatial anomaly that had caused the malfunction in the transition zone disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. Dozens of miniature hyperspace funnels collapsed, leaving no trace behind except the bewilderment and confusion of the station's personnel. It's all over, it seems. Ivanova looked warily at the sensor readings, which were returning to normal. Yes, it looks like it's all over, but what was that? Commander Sinclair was also looking through the report. Something didn't add up. It was alarming. Ivanova, something's wrong with this testimony. Something wrong, sir? Everything is wrong here, starting with the fact that the craters can't be that small. And to top it off, the behavior of the transition zone. Your mother, the lieutenant cursed, having received a report from the technicians who had flown out to the transition zone, just as this whistle blowing with energy that had come from nowhere had ended. What else? Because of this anomaly, the transition zone was overloaded. If the residual charge is not removed from it, the first ship from any side will cause an explosion. Damn! Call a council meeting immediately and begin the procedure of shutting down the zone for maintenance. The commander got his bearings. Are there ships expected on the arrival schedule? Yes, in 8 hours, a passenger from Centaur. We won't have time to turn off the zone, but the technicians say that the charge can be removed from the working device. Okay, let them work. Let's hope there won't be any unplanned ships. And the day started off so well. He uttered the last phrase barely audibly, already heading from the bridge to the advisory council meeting room. Commander Sinclair, as the official representative of the Centauri Republic, I demand that you provide me with all information you have about the attack on the colony Rajesh 3. Ambassador Londo Mollari literally burst into the conference room, almost knocking down the gathering representatives of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds at the door. We received a distress signal and know no more than you, Ambassador, Sinclair said discontentedly, settling down at the table in the chairman's place. What does the Prime Minister say? He doesn't say anything. I sent 3 messages. 3! And no answer. Everyone is keeping quiet, as if nothing happened. Ambassador, I just found out. Delen, the Minbari ambassador, entered the room. I express my sincere condolences. Gekar, the Narn ambassador, joined her as he entered. What do you know about the attack, Gekar? Londo's dislike for the Narn was palpable, as was his suspicion. Absolutely nothing, I assure you. The ambassador spread his hands. I am as surprised as you are. Gentlemen, Jeffrey Sinclair, realizing that he was simply being ignored, slammed his palm on the table several times, attracting attention. This attack is certainly a serious incident and we must find out what happened. But right now, there is a more urgent matter to discuss. What could be more important, Commander? Mollari flared up. Our colony was destroyed. Let me finish. An anomaly of unknown origin was detected near the station an hour ago, causing disruptions in the operation of our transition zone. And what? And that? For as long as he could remember as commander of Babylon 5, Sinclair had always been pissed off by the Centauri ambassador. A lover of drink and women, an inveterate gambler and a troublemaker. He had always brought nothing but trouble, avoiding communication with the head of security only because of his diplomatic status. If the zone is not fixed, then the first time the ship passes through it, both the zone and the station, where, may I remind you? The commander pointed his finger at Londo. You are located, including yourself, will explode to hell. Commander Sinclair? Delen said. What do you want from the council members? How can we help? Please contact your governments. We'll need at least a day to fix the jump zone without taking it out of service. We need someone on duty in hyperspace to prevent ships from getting to Babylon 5. But they will have to hang in hyperspace without reference points. Ambassador Mollari, why do you think I mentioned the ships on duty? Babylon 5's homing beacon will continue to function, and your ships will be able to adjust their position based on its signal and greet incoming ships, warning them not to activate the zone until we've completed the repairs. I'll contact our government, Commander Sinclair. Delen has always impressed Sinclair positively. Despite the recent war, she's been a sincere participant in the Council's work, not just in words but in deeds, turning Babylon 5 into a zone of peace and neutrality. I think we can spare a ship for patrol for as long as needed. Thank you, Delen. Then, if we have resolved this issue, I suggest we end here. But what about the attack? Londo couldn't keep silent. We have to find out who attacked our agricultural colony. Ambassador Molari. The commander replied, barely keeping from growling. As soon as we have reliable information about this attack, we will call an emergency session of the Council and provide you with all possible support. As I thought, Babylon 5's security systems looked simply depressing compared to those of Asgard. Not at all, to be honest. In fact, all my efforts were aimed solely at leaving no traces of my actions, while I had full access to the lists of station inhabitants, including the list of command staff, to the schedule of arriving and departing ships, their routes for the coming week, passwords and security codes. Even some highly classified information of purely military use. However, the most important thing now was the routes and flight schedules of the supply fleets and, of course, navigation information for the galaxy. There was no point in me staying at the station. There were several reasons for this, and the first on the list was the instinct of self-preservation. Each replicator beetle consists of 60 blocks on average. The queen, that is, the same replicator beetle rebuilt for production, produces 1 block per second. Of course, only if there are enough resources and energy, but on a metal spaceship, almost any point in space has direct access to both resources and the power grid. Thus, every minute, 1 queen creates a new replicator. On average, every 6th of them can already become a new queen, without compromising the speed of resource supply of the previous one. And then the number grows exponentially. Thus, in less than 12 hours, almost any medium-sized ship will be completely devoured. And the work of 1 replicator that got on board will be enough to subjugate all systems for 10 minutes. The ships of Asgard authoritatively confirm this. But here we are far from having a medium-sized ship. Here is a station of 2.5 million tons of steel, stationary, with a disgusting defense system, no hint of shields or any serious weapons. Besides, I am vulnerable now. To neutralize me, it is enough to throw me into open space, and Babylon is a point of contact of interests of almost all major players of this galaxy. The natural reaction of any reasonable person to an attempt to encroach on his interests is aggression. No one will give me even 12 hours. The second reason stems from the first. I need to find my place in the new world, to get the opportunity to play at least approximately on equal terms with the participants of local showdowns. And this, first of all, meant resources. As far as I managed to study the technologies of the local races, the ships of the replicators here will become practically invincible. But these ships still need to be created from something, or, in extreme cases, ready-made ones need to be modified, and for this, resources are again needed. And here I had a stroke of luck. The news channels were actively discussing the topic of an attack by unknown people on a remote colony of Centauri. And so remote that some people had already declared that sending a fleet there was useless, saying that by the time it got there would be no one to save. What is that if not luck? After looking through the lists of ships leaving soon, I found one very suitable truck, and after connecting to the station's surveillance system, I also found the necessary pilot in one of the eateries, leaving the first brother with the command to continue processing scrap metal at hand into blocks. And then, on a separate command, to quietly make his way to my location, I left the cabin, still heading towards the elevator. The only problem I saw for my plan was an emergency blockade of the transition zone due to its overload, the cause of which, as I understood, was my arrival at the station. Although, what am I bothering about? It is enough for me to get on the transporter, which is now hanging, as far as I know, near the station and awaiting permission to take off, while its pilot gets drunk on cheap alcohol. And there the replicators will calmly assemble a hyperdrive in it. And not some local, incomprehensible something, but a full-fledged engine, independent of the transition zones and capable, among other things, of intergalactic flights. The pilot of the ship I needed had not moved, remaining in the same place in a cheap dive, sitting in the corner in front of a battery of empty glasses. I wonder if this is a common feature of all space pilots, or if he has some kind of problems. The pub was a typical drinking establishment. Semi-darkness, the noise of many voices, the concentration of alcohol vapors in the air, more suitable for a liquor factory. And fights, of course. Even from the entrance I heard loud shouts and the noise of breaking furniture. And a moment later, one of the visitors was thrown out towards me, then slid down the wall. By the way, I noticed that the local earthly fashion is quite conservative. Men prefer trousers and jackets in classic colors. Women are deprived of all miniskirts, open tops, and so on, also preferring closed, restrained styles. And no flashy paintwork in poisonous bright colors. All around is classic. I heard a clatter of feet around the corner, and a moment later, a guard came out. I thought it best to duck around the corner on the other side of the pub entrance to avoid their eyes. "Stop the riots," came from inside. "Tie them up." The sounds of truncheons were intertwined with the fight, and after a couple of minutes, everything went quiet, and the guards came out into the corridor, pushing 5 aliens in front of them, apparently the instigators of the brawl. And a couple of minutes later, my pilot followed them out, heading down the corridor in my direction. I let him pass me and waited a bit, then followed him. Carlos Boyer. When we had moved sufficient distance from the tavern, I called out to the pilot, approaching closer. "Yes? What do you need?" He answered in a drunken voice. "I need your appearance, documents, and ship." I answered completely honestly, stunning him with a Zeta discharge. Looking back at both ends of the corridor and not noticing any unexpected observers, I picked up the pilot by the scruff of the neck and dragged him towards the nearest technical hatch, the location of which also came to me along with the station diagrams. And then everything was extremely simple. Copying his appearance was a matter of seconds. Even less was getting the pass card and forming an exact copy from nanites, while the original card dissolved in my hands. It took a little more time, and that was out of habit, although for replicators of my type it was a common thing to take over part of his memory, pumping it directly from his brain. Now even his relatives would not notice the difference between the two of us, even in fine motor skills and behavior. With the last command through the nanites before leaving him in this utility room, I put him into a long sleep, at a guess for a couple of days. What would happen next, I did not particularly care. Just as unnoticed as I had entered the utility room, I returned to the corridor and headed towards the central monorail station, going through most of the station. Be careful, the doors are closing. Be careful, the traffic passes through the zero-gravity zone. Enjoy your trip. People. They haven't even mastered gravity technologies, but they still go there to conquer space. As far as I remembered the canon of the universe, all the younger races that went into space subdued gravity one way or another, and only people, as the most backward, still used rotating elements to maintain it. And I'm not even talking about the aesthetics of their ships. I looked in the databases for brief descriptions of Earth ships. What can I say? Flying iron is still a soft and politically correct description of the ships of the Earth Commonwealth. But by the way, the project of Babylon 5 still inspired some pride for my historical homeland. After all, to build an 8-kilometer station, practically from the remains of construction waste after the first 4 Babylons, and to arrange a huge hydroponic section, almost a third of the structure, it inspired. It was precisely along this garden that the monorail ran, stretching along the axis of rotation of the station. Somewhere down there were more expensive eateries, allowing guests to enjoy living nature, parks for walks, areas for outdoor sports, cargo berths, loading and unloading area for small transport ships, terminal. I rode alone in the carriage to the final destination of the route, apparently due to the temporary ban on using the transition zone. The pilots were in no hurry to return to their ships, preferring the relative comfort of drinking establishments to their cramped quarters. According to the information from the computer, my transport was currently hanging outside the station. The cargo with which I had flown to Babylon had already been unloaded, so now the containers contained only mining equipment manufactured by Drazi for the extraction of rare earth metals on the planetoid E4718 Clean. No problem. I think they'll survive without these combines, and they'll find a more useful use for them. What brought you here, Carlos? One of the workers called out to me. There won't be any flights until the transition zone is finished. Yes, I know. I waved it off. But I need to fill out the paperwork for the next client, so I decided to do it while I have some free time. Otherwise, I can't stand the booze anymore. I'm probably getting old. Hey, did you all hear? The loader shouted in surprise. Boyer refuses to drink. Who are you? Turning towards me. Where did you put old Carlos? I'm a scary robot from another dimension, made up of tiny nanomachines, who came here to create his own empire. And I knocked out Carlos and left him to sleep it off at the bar. I answered completely honestly. For a few seconds there was a surprised silence in the cargo dock, and then laughter burst out. Damn it, Carlos. It's really time for you to quit drinking. Your imagination has become too unhealthy. Okay, should I give you a lift to Sisyphus? Well, yes. Heh heh. And this method works here, it turns out. Marcus, I think your shuttle is idle. Throw Boyer to his truck since he needs to work. We loaded into the shuttle and without any problems exited the station, and in a couple of minutes we were already docking with my ship. Sisyphus was a relatively small cylinder, similar to the rocket carriers of the 20th, 21st centuries, to which 6 cargo containers were attached. 5 times wider than the main body. There could be no talk of any aesthetics of appearance, speed characteristics, and other nonsense in such a situation. However, this is exactly why I chose it. More metal, more resources for processing, and therefore more space for reproduction. So, let's do an audit. According to the onboard computer, 4 containers are empty, 2 are filled with that same mining equipment. There is no crew on board, everyone is on the Babylon. Well, so much the better. Let's start slowly. I walked into one of the filled cargo containers, skeptically examining the ship's interior layout along the way. It was immediately obvious that it was designed strictly for transporting large volumes of cargo, and there was no talk of any comfort for the crew. There were 3 cabins. 2 of them were only slightly larger than necessary to install a bunk and a locker, and the third, apparently the captain's, also contained a workstation, table, chair, computer terminal. Hell, even trains on Earth had larger compartments. This time, the transformation of the blocks did not take away even a fraction of the previous attention, especially since the bugs that remained on the station were also multiplying all this time, having already penetrated the technical corridors between the decks and hidden the traces of their presence in the slums. The subspace network and available computing power were constantly growing, so that another created replicator had a vanishingly small effect on the sensations. I decided to leave the first queen and her brood on the station. It was possible to bring them to the ship, but too labor-intensive. In addition, they provided me with information contact with Babylon. A few days will pass and the entire station will be under my hood. And this is diplomatic correspondence, trade deals, the policy of most local powers, and finally, the strategy of the coming war. In addition, if necessary, they will be able to attack the station from the inside, when I personally will no longer be in danger. In general, let them carefully breed and multiply. It will be much easier for me to create a material base on Ragish 3. Fortunately, there is chaos and confusion there now. The latest media reports say that the attack was carried out by Narn regime ships. The Centauri have kept quiet so far, but I don't think they'd be too offended if I stole a few of their orbital stations. If there are any left, at least the footage I saw showed only a few destroyed, provided the Narn fleet is gone too. Well, the uterus was ready, and I proudly gave the command. Alien freebie, take. He heh. Let's start modernizing this miscarriage of human engineering thought. The spider happily creaked and immediately connected to the transport power grid. No matter how you look at it, atomic forging is an energy-consuming process, and the productivity of the little replicator on its own resources left much to be desired. The first thing to do was to eat everything possible, but so that until the last moment the ship looked like the same Sisyphus truck from the outside. Next, the hyperdrive, shields, and only then rationalization of the hull. In general, there is enough work for the next few hours. Still, being a replicator is an interesting feeling. I felt each of the younger ones, could see them with my eyes, control them directly, or, having given a command, forget about them, knowing that they will carry out the assigned task in the best possible way. And in the meantime, literally in 4 hours, the mother and the spiders she created processed 90% of the hull of the Sisyphus, leaving only a thin layer, like a cocoon, covering their activity inside and the outer part of the ship's propulsion system. In order not to disturb them, I sat in the control room all this time, watching how the ship gradually changed. And now finally, there was only one last detail left: to remove the outer camouflage and give the ship a finished hull shape. But to do this, I needed to hide from possible observers, of which there were many. Technicians, like ants, scurrying around the transition zone. Other cargo and passenger ships, awaiting permission to take off, and the crew of Babylon 5 itself. But I had a good idea for this. The new engines were ready, as was the power plant, so the command to take off could be given. Sisyphus slowly moved towards the planet in whose orbit the station was located. Flight S-756E. You have not been given clearance to take off. Earth Commonwealth cargo ship Sisyphus, respond. This is Carlos Boye, captain of the Sisyphus. I answered the Babylon dispatcher, feigning some panic in my voice. There was an abnormal engine start. I repeat, I did not give the command to take off. The ship's engine started by itself, probably a problem with the onboard computer. I can't do anything, I'm being carried away towards the planet. No, well, why not? I really didn't turn on the engine. It's all the replicators. Yes. So, now we'll adjust the course so as to enter a high orbit of the planet. Then soon its disk will hide me from all observers. Understood. Sisyphus, don't panic. According to our calculations, the ship will enter the planet's orbit. Given your speed, in an hour and 40 minutes, you will be with us again. You will be met by repairmen and towed to Babylon. Wait. Received. He. Okay. Now all that's left is to wait. The planet's disk hid me in about 15 minutes. Let's begin. The team is junior, and the hull, in all ranges, including optical, is hidden by a camouflage system, once borrowed by the replicators from the flagship Super Hattaka Apophis. The next moment, the remains of the outer shell of the Sisyphus are eaten up at a furious speed, revealing the real form of the ship, which in an instant ceases to have anything in common with the ugly truck. The blocks that took up space in the cargo containers shift, folding towards the central part. A few seconds and a typical replicator cruiser, perhaps a little smaller, is moving in orbit around the planet. Well, the Eaton truck wasn't that big either. Let's call it Loki. Of course, the replicators don't give a damn about the name of the ship, or rather they get by with digital values, but it's a trifle for me, but it's nice. I was about to give the command to jump into hyperspace, when the ship's sensors detected signs of intelligent, and even more so, highly developed life on the planet below. No, the planet's surface, like all bases, was uninhabited, but somewhere deep in its crust there was clearly some kind of colossal technological structure. Moreover, the energy background from there was such as if the entire planet was one cyclopean reactor. Apparently Babylon's scanners are not sophisticated enough to notice this, but it reminded me of something extremely vaguely preserved in the human part of my memory, but definitely important. In any case, those who could build something like this and hide under the noses of almost all the races of this galaxy, at the very least, deserve to be feared. So let's not tempt fate and go about our business. We can sort this out later, when I have a reliable base and resources. Well, Now the most important thing is to find out in practice whether the local subspace really differs so radically from the one I, a replicator, am used to, or whether there are two different phenomena that by chance have received the same name. It's a pity that I haven't had the opportunity to delve into a full-fledged locally produced hyperdrive. Such technologies are not posted in the public domain, that is, in the inter, holo, extra, and other nets, at most. A popular science description, but this is not enough for far-reaching conclusions. The main thing is that the connection between the blocks works without interruptions, which means that there is something there, and my technologies are valid. However, if it were otherwise, I simply would not be able to exist here. So, course Rajesh 3. A hyperspace jump window opened in front of Loki and the ship, suddenly gaining speed, went into hyperspace. Chapter 2. What do you want? Before using any captured device, it is important to read the instructions. Dark Lord Rule 7 Interlude. Flight S1756E, you have not been given clearance to take off. Earth Commonwealth cargo ship Sisyphus, respond. This is Carlos Boyer, captain of the Sisyphus. A slightly agitated male voice answered the Babylon dispatcher. There was an abnormal engine start. I repeat, I did not give the command to take off. The ship's engine started by itself, probably a problem with the onboard computer. I can't do anything. I'm being carried away towards the planet. Understood. Sisyphus, don't panic. According to our calculations, the ship will enter the planet's orbit. Given your speed, in an hour and 40 minutes you will be with us again. You will be met by repairmen and towed to Babylon. Wait. Received. The station's bridge controller switched the communication channel, calling the emergency rescue service and repair crews. Cargo dock, this is the bridge. Emergency situation. The Earth Commonwealth transport ship Sisyphus has launched towards the planet. There is one person on board. According to him, there was an unplanned engine start. The ship is entering an elliptical orbit. Accept it at the end of the turn and tow it back. Understood. We're sending a rescue team. The sergeant, having fulfilled his duty, nodded to himself with satisfaction, turning off the connection and continuing to track the ship's position using sensor readings, at least, as long as it was possible. But soon the transporter disappeared behind the planet's disk, and it became impossible to track it, even with the help of the station's powerful sensors. All that was left was to wait for the Sisyphus to appear in the field of vision again. Meanwhile, a repair team consisting of one ship and 10 unmanned bots had already set off, ready to pick up the truck and, having forcibly turned off its engine, tow it back to the Babylon. Babylon, this is the repair team. The voice of the brigade commander was heard after about an hour of waiting. What do you have? There is no ship. What? Given its speed, we should have detected it at the limit of sensitivity, but there's nothing beyond the planet. Maybe he hasn't come out from behind the disk yet. Wait, we're waiting Babylon, what else is left? The remaining 40 minutes seemed like an eternity to the dispatcher. It soon became clear that something incomprehensible had happened to the ship. Sisyphus did not appear in orbit either after 40 minutes or after another half hour. Lieutenant Ivanova! Lieutenant! He didn't want to wake up his commander, who had only recently handed over his post, but he had to report the emergency. If you haven't started the Second Earth Minbari War, Sergeant. Ivanova's sleepy voice came over the intercom. I'm sending you to scrub the outer hull of the station. With a toothbrush? Sorry, Lieutenant, but our ship is missing. How did it disappear? Where could the ship have disappeared to? Despite being pulled out of bed, the deputy commander woke up almost instantly, realizing what was being said. 2 hours ago, the launch of the Sisyphus was detected, a large-capacity transport ship of the Tescan II type. At that time, only the ship's captain was on board. He reported an abnormal engine launch, which caused the ship to be thrown into an elliptical orbit around the planet. We expected to catch it on the way back and tow it to the Babylon, but it disappeared. How the hell is this possible? I don't know. The emergency team flew out to meet it and was supposed to catch the ship in orbit, but it didn't appear because of the planet's disk. When the ship wasn't found an hour later, I informed you. Damn it. Luckily, the hyperspace jump methods used by the replicators worked in this world too. At least for me, everything looked exactly the same, as I remembered the bluish cloud failure of the hyper window, the sharp acceleration of the ship, the flight along the hyper, tunnel to the target, and the same exit to normal space with the need to slow down. Damn, I need to improve the camouflage system. Even taking into account the technical performance of the replicators, after exiting hyper, the ship had no camouflage for 11.47 seconds. And this is twice as long as it takes to reboot the shields. It would seem like insignificant numbers, especially in comparison with other races of the Stargate universe. But for the perception of the replicator, these seconds are almost an eternity. True, there was no danger. I prudently exited on the outskirts of the system, so they could not notice me. And there was no one to notice, strictly speaking. Active military actions here had already ended, and the Narn ships remaining near the colony patrolled the space around the transition zone and in close orbit of the planet. And I very much doubt that they would have been able to detect me at all, except visually. According to first impressions, the local electronic warfare systems are an order of magnitude inferior even to the Goa'uld ones, not to mention the Asgards, and the replicator blocks have learned to hide from the scanners of the latter more than effectively. So, what do we have? Rajesh 3. An agricultural world at the beginning of the current conflict belonged to Centauri. Long before that, it was a colony of the Narn regime. Then the Narns were conquered by Centauri. Then the Narns freed themselves, but the colony was never returned until today. There are several research stations in orbit. They also provide primary observation of the space and some protection of the colony from the same pirates. The fleet of the owners was not detected. The Narn fleet was represented by a pair of TX Nor-class cruisers, 5 T-Loth-class landing cruisers cruising in low orbit of the planet, providing support for the landing force, and a couple dozen fighters. Well, let's start slowly. I won't waste my time on fighters, but I should probably get the cruisers. Under camouflage, I slowly approached the planet. Slowly by the standards of the replicators and Asgards, and for the locals, I was shamelessly fast, but there's nothing to be upset about. And here's the first client. A group of structural blocks separated from the Loki hull, formed into a spindle, and accelerating flew toward the Narn ship. Even if the Narns had noticed something on the scanners, they hadn't had time to react. As expected. The torpedo from the blocks successfully penetrated the hull, and the replicators penetrated inside, immediately beginning to integrate themselves into the ship's systems and take over control of all systems. Alarm. Psh. Attacked. Psh. Out of control. Psh. Fragmentary radio signals from the internal communication that I had listened to spilled out into the air. The external one was intercepted first. Fighters and the second cruiser were already heading towards the ship that had lost control, tensely feeling the space at the limit of their sensors' capabilities. And the spiders were already doing their job. The only thing was that I did not interfere with the crew getting to the lifeboats, of course. Only if they would not interfere with the work or attack. If they can, let them save themselves. The priority now is speed, and excessive cruelty can significantly interfere in the future. Even if in this situation the main aggressor is the Narns. And here is the second cruiser. Let's listen to what they are talking about. Cruiser Gartok, report the situation. Gartok, over. Gartor, evacuate the crew. We have detected abnormal energy fluctuations in your reactor. Leave the ship. Well, that's your place. And here's your second present, gentlemen. Still under cover of invisibility, I approach the second cruiser from behind. This time, I have partial blueprints of the cruiser, so the second projectile hits the reactor area specifically to speed up the process. And rescue capsules are already being fired from the first cruiser, heading towards the 3 landing ships coming here at maximum speed, having noticed that something is happening to the fleet. Leaving behind the second cruiser, successfully captured by the younger ones, I headed to intercept the landing ships, preparing several torpedoes at once. After all, the camouflage system gives an incredible advantage, especially if the ship is not visible, even in the optical range. And here come the guests, a salvo of torpedoes at 3 cruisers at once and the standard command. Take. Stupidity, of course. I, in fact, control the movements of each beetle in real time, including even those on Babylon. It just happens as naturally as for a person to move his hands. If you don't concentrate, you won't notice. But without such trifles, it's boring. These ships were smaller than the previous ones, but there were more of them, but they did not cause problems. The replicators still effectively intercepted control of the main systems, turned off long-range communications, and began the initial restructuring of the reactors and hyperdrives. And only now, when a whole bunch of rescue capsules from 5 ships were hanging around Regish 3, and these same ships were drifting motionless in space, not reacting to any external stimuli, did the Narns realize that this was not without reason. The bombers, which had been cruising with fighters near the transition zone or catching capsules, moved on an attack course towards the cruisers I had captured, and the remaining 2 landing ships headed away from the planet, clearly intending to go into hyperspace. Oh no! The weapon systems on the Loki were already assembled, so a thin blue beam crossed out the formation of small Narn ships, causing a series of explosions. I did not chase the fighters flying away from their destroyed brothers. Let them fly. It was not a fact that they would be able to get anywhere from here anyway, so I turned my attention to the landing cruisers, trying to escape. They can't escape with our speed difference. Why did they rush to the transition zone? Don't they risk opening the funnel themselves? Oh yeah. During a hyperspace jump using local technology, the ship remains almost completely without energy for some time, and it is theoretically possible to destroy an open funnel. But it is considered bad form to destroy a stationary transition zone, something like, because public opinion will not approve. Well, that's their right. 2 aim shots destroyed the ship's engines, leaving them to flare up with explosions and drift near the much-desired but already so unattainable transition zone. But while I was busy with the cruisers, several Narn fighters managed to slip through to the transition zone and go into hyperspace, hiding among the wreckage of one of the landing ships. Okay, I thought, it's not fatal. After all, I didn't set myself the goal of committing genocide here. And besides, well, if only they brought help. It's better for me. Who in their right mind would refuse free additional resources, especially when they're needed? Well, now we can calmly get down to business. The spiders in the captured ships begin the thorough work of absorbing materials and studying technologies. 2 more torpedoes separate from my ship to the damaged transports, and 1 group of replicators in the form of a spider ship with a team to collect and process the debris from the destroyed ships. And what remains of the Loki after all the shrinking slowly heads to the nearest orbital station. It would be a sin to leave so many resources. The stations turned out to be empty. The Narns, having seized power in the system, simply switched them to automatic operation, leaving only the functions of transmitting data from the sensors, and the personnel were lowered into the colony. So, the replicators of the Loki hull disassembled their structures without any obstacles, downloaded all the data from the onboard logs, and then the ship flew to the next target. In all, it took 12 hours, 47 minutes, 13 seconds, after which the surrounding space of Regish 3 was cleared, as if there had been no military actions, orbital stations, or anything at all. I deliberately did not go down to the colony to the surface of the planet. I listened to a little panic on the air and decided not to get involved. Let the Narns and Centaurians sort things out themselves. The fleet was ready to leave this system. I, having checked the navigation charts of Babylon, found a system rich in resources suitable for further reproduction of replicators and construction of ships, and, most importantly, with the note, not promising due to difficulties in resource extraction. But this is not promising with human technologies. And for replicators, this is a ready-made warehouse of building materials. Having received the command, all the replicators in the system headed towards the Loki, forming one common ship with mine at the center. A hyper window opened in front of the ship for a split second, and the orbit of Rajesh 3 was empty. Interlude. I declare the meeting of the Advisory Council of the Galactic Federations open. Lieutenant Ivanova glanced at the assembled ambassadors with displeasure. We are about to vote on the issue of sanctions against the Narn regime. Will we establish a blockade or... I ask for the floor. Ambassador Gekar quickly entered the council hall. Ambassador Gekar, I would like to remind the council that before the Centauri Republic invaded our sector, he interrupted the chairman again, and imposed a century-long tyranny. Rajesh 3 was a Narn colony, so we simply drove out the invaders and reclaimed our property. Ambassador, we recognize the primary right, Dylan spoke up. But you must admit, Rajesh 3 has belonged to the Centauri for over a century. Start a war over old feuds? Where will that lead? You attack, kill the Centauri, take their planets. They attack, kill you, take their planets back, and so on, and again and again. It's a vicious circle. This is justice. We are not seeking war. Our goal was to liberate the colony Rajesh 3. We did not start the battle, and we have proof of that. Evidence? Londo couldn't stand it, jumping up from his seat. What evidence can justify this treacherous attack? Yes, evidence. Let's watch the live broadcast from the Rajesh 3 station. This will settle all our disputes. Please pay attention to the screen. Surprise blossomed on the faces of the council members, but they all turned their heads to the monitor on the wall. The image flickered, and a young Centauri with a tired expression appeared in the frame. My name is Karn Molari. I am the scientific coordinator of the agricultural colony Rajesh 3. Londo jumped up from his seat, stunned, not believing his eyes. And I would add that this is the nephew of the esteemed ambassador Londo Molari, Gekar added sarcastically. There have been skirmishes on the station for the last 6 months, Khan continued, caused by conflicts among the colonists. We have repeatedly asked the Prime Minister for help, but have received no response. In conditions of chaos and anarchy, the Administrative Council of the Rajesh 3 station has turned to the Narn regime for help. It's a lie. Londo, so excited, even went to the middle of the hall and started gesticulating. We have chosen to ally ourselves with the Narn government of our own free will. Of course, we will maintain strong ties. We're under attack. Alarm! Karn turned around in fear, and a Narn soldier ran into the frame, waving his arms excitedly. We're under attack! Here, Gekar also jumped up to the screen. Londo's nephew was taken out of the frame, obviously conducting a mass evacuation of the facility where the filming took place. And a few seconds later, the signal was interrupted, leaving only the interference of a broken connection. What is this? Karn. It was scary to look at Molari. He turned so pale, peering into the monitor. Gekar didn't look much better, striking everyone around him with an expression of extreme surprise and bewilderment on his face. However, confusion and surprise were present on the faces of the other members of the council as well. Ambassadors. Delenn was the first to control herself. I think that identifying the guilty is not the most important thing now. We need to find out what happened on Rajesh 3. What happened to the civilian population? It's clear. Londo sank back into his seat, looking lost. It's all the Narns. It's a provocation. I object. You saw that we were attacked too, Gekar exclaimed. Ambassadors. Ambassadors. Calm down. It's too early to say anything definite. Ambassador Molari. Londo. Yes? Contact the Centauri government. We need to send ships there, find out what happened. And Gekar, you also contact the Narn. Your people were there. If they are alive, we need to evacuate them. We will not allow Narn ships into our territory. Londo, if it makes you feel better, Minbar will also send their ship to help with the investigation and to prevent conflict. In that case, Lieutenant Ivanova took the floor. I declare a break. The Council will meet tomorrow when we receive new information from the Rajesh 3 system.
This is outrageous.
First an attack on our colony, and now the fleet sent there to clarify the situation reports that the entire space infrastructure of the colony has been destroyed. Not a single station, not a single ship. And the Narns? What about the Narns? Ambassador Jakar entered the council chamber, looking focused and worried. A crowd of Narns, Londo replied sarcastically, wandering around the surface of Rajesh 3, claiming that they were attacked by an unknown, invisible enemy and were forced to evacuate to the surface of the planet. Ambassador Mollari, this is not the time for jokes, I think. Jakar forced himself to refrain from making more harsh statements. The Narn have lost a large number of ships. And this is retribution, Mollari exclaimed triumphantly, jumping up and shaking his finger in front of the Narn's nose. Consider this retribution from the universe. You treacherously attacked our colony, and where is your fleet now? All that is left of it is a handful of Narns stuck on the planet. You know, Gikar, the Centauri smiled, we will not even prevent the evacuation of your people. Take the Narns, this will serve as a good lesson for you. Ambassadors. Lieutenant Ivanova, acting as the chairperson of the council, tried to calm down the raging representatives of the two irreconcilable peoples. Report to the council what exactly happened in this colony. We just received reports from our ships. Now, having the opportunity to mock the Narn, Londo gladly took the floor. Around Rajesh 3 there were several scientific research orbital stations, which also served to observe space. When we arrived at the place, we found no traces. What do you mean? The attackers escaped? Ivanova didn't understand. No. Gikar grimaced, taking the floor. There was nothing around the planet, only empty space. No debris, no Narn ships, no orbital stations. Someone or something came unnoticed, and our ships dissolved into space, without having time to send a single signal. The same fate befell our stations, Londo interjected. What happened to the crews? Praise be to the Almighty. The crews of the orbital stations were sent to the surface of the planet by the Narns, so everyone is alive. But for you, Gikar, everything is not so rosy. I don't know how many ships you lost, but there are only a few Narns left in the system. Mollari, I don't know anything. It's retribution, Gikar. What did you say? It's justice, isn't it? With these words, the Centauri ambassador turned and left the council hall, smiling and humming a cheerful song under his breath. Ambassador Rear Koto, who'd been tensely awaiting the results of the meeting, nearly fell off the couch onto the floor in surprise when his boss, shining like a polished Centauri ducat, flew into his chambers. What did they say? What did they find out? Veer. Londo looked at him seriously. Rajesh 3 was really attacked, and twice. First by the Narns, and then those impudent marsupials were put in their place. But who? I don't know, Veer, but the colony is ours again, even though we lost 5 orbital stations. The Centauri ambassador walked with a springy gait to the bar, and having chosen the best wine, tipped half a bottle into a large golden cup and proudly drained it. 5 stations? The Narns destroyed them? The young aristocrat moved closer, excited. No, Londo's mood did not even think of falling. The Narns who remained in the colony claimed that they captured them intact. Karn also confirmed this. Means... Yes. Stop ruining my moment with your Lenten mug. Mollari grimaced demonstratively. Take a glass and come here, we're going to celebrate. But Londo, they destroyed our stations. To hell with the stations, we're... The raging ambassador himself walked up to his assistant and shoved a filled glass into his hands, immediately setting an example of what to do with the contents. Taking a sip from the one he was holding in his other hand. It was all old stuff from the time of the occupation of Narn anyway. The main thing. Mollari raised his hand with a glass to the ceiling and stared off into the space of fantasies invisible to others. The main thing, is that they kicked the asses of those arrogant, dirty barbarians. And I'll drink to that. We'll drink, but drink. The commanding voice of the senior Centauri, combined with a fatherly slap on the back, instantly made Koto hide his nose in the cup. To those who saved our colony, Londo solemnly proclaimed and, staring thoughtfully ahead for a moment, added in a whisper, whoever they were. Well, I think what happened to the Centauri colony will make not only its current owners think, but also the entire council on Babylon Chapter 5. I was a realist and understood perfectly well that my actions there could not go completely unnoticed, even if I had carried out a complete purge of witnesses. That was why it was not my goal. In any case, I had nothing to worry about. Without direct intervention of the Vorlons or the Shadows, the local races were not dangerous to me. The trophies clearly confirmed this fact. If Babylon 5 could still be considered an example of backward technologies, no less backward race, then the Narns were already a more serious horse. It was they who once sold the Earth the most advanced weapons technologies available to its fleet at that time. They also controlled the lion's share of both the legal and illegal weapons market in the galaxy. They officially have the third most powerful military fleet in the galaxy, second only to the Vorlon and Minbar. And finally, they are so confident in themselves that right now, in fact, they have declared war on Centauri, which, despite its severe decline, both political and in general, remains a local superpower with a very, very advanced level of technology by local standards. And so, having studied their ships, I came to the conclusion that they do not pose a threat to me as such. They simply did not have weapon systems capable of damaging a replicator ship, even if it turned off the shields. The blocks would simply absorb the energy directed at them. If we remember that I have Asgard teleportation technology and the complete lack of shields among the locals, in general, I didn't have to hide under a broom, afraid to even squeak. Besides, there were a bunch of junior replicators left on Babylon, now actively, albeit carefully, breeding in the technical passages of the station and integrating into the control lines. If something happened, I would know about it immediately, as long as my relatives got to the protected communication lines so that it would remain unnoticed. They would have already gotten there, if I had put such a task in the priority category, but I saw no point in rushing. Let them breed quietly, that was more important. So, having reached the chosen system with a metal-rich asteroid belt with a clear conscience, I sent some of the replicators to extract resources. After all, a planet is a planet, but asteroids are really almost a ready-made warehouse of materials, which are difficult to extract only for ordinary intelligent beings. The choice of this particular planetary system was justified by several reasons. Firstly, there were 10 planets here, none of which, in their pure form, were suitable for life for most races of the galaxy. And terraforming is still an extremely expensive thing, especially when there are many much more hospitable celestial bodies. Secondly, there was a vast asteroid field, on many of which, according to the database, Quantum 40 was discovered. A super heavy substance, amusingly similar to Naquadria. The physical properties were slightly different, but not so critical that I could not adapt to it. In general, it is interesting that in the Ida galaxy, the home galaxy of the Asgards, as well as in the Milky Way of the same reality, Naquadria in its pure form was not found. There was only Naquada, a much more stable, but also less energy-intensive substance. And here it is the opposite. A very interesting phenomenon, judging by the knowledge of me, the Replicator, in the field of the theory of the formation of planetary systems. Well, and thirdly, there was no transition zone in this system, which means the chances of meeting unexpected guests here are extremely small. In general, I had both time and reasons to dig in quite thoroughly in this system and start to equip, if not a base, then at least an outpost for future actions. At the same time, I will think about what exactly to do with the upcoming events. And I will have to spin around quite a bit. After all, I do not know the canon of this universe at all. First in line, I chose the third planet from the local sun, according to fragmentary geological exploration data. It was rich in ores and minerals, convenient for processing by replicators. Loki landed on the planet's surface, and the blocks split, forming thousands of smaller ones that immediately began working, gnawing into the rocky ground. And I, having left myself a small capsule for convenience, thought about in what capacity I would return to Babylon 5, which was undoubtedly the main center in the web of future events. The best option was, perhaps, to introduce myself as an ambassador of a new civilization that had discovered Babylon 5 and had been secretly observing it until then. If only I could think of what kind. I thoughtfully began to scroll through the images of all the races whose technology was absorbed by the replicators. And the further I went, the more often my attention stopped on the Goa'uld. No, the symbiotic worms themselves did not interest me, but the general idea. Also, the ships of this civilization looked good for a first impression. Just look at the cruisers of the Hattak type, and especially their improved version, which was almost a third the length of Babylon 5. Well, the general concept of divinity fit in well with the difference in the level of technological development, especially if you take into account the capabilities of the replicators. Along the way, the appearance of my future body began to take shape. I couldn't remain in the guise of the pilot of Sisyphus, whose appearance I borrowed and still have not removed because it was unnecessary. In the end, I settled on the appearance of Bel, one of the Goa'uld system lords I knew about. A beard, a mustache, the face of a seasoned troll, and at the same time rather elegant clothes, just right for the role of an ambassador of a new and strong civilization. From such a one, you equally likely expect both participation in a wild party and the decision to declare war. In principle, from the point of view of a replicator, I was now doing complete nonsense. From the point of view of a human, I was also not very sure of the rationality of my actions. But on the other hand, what else should I do? Arrange a standard reply rush. I'll eat everyone, I'll be the only one left. What's the point? The multiply directive, which determines all the actions of replicators in the Ida galaxy, is an empty phrase for me personally. It is no longer even in the code of the younger ones I created in the sense of a guideline. It remains only in terms of available tools. Settle in this system and sit quietly and peacefully, not bothering anyone, while wars thunder in the galaxy and new forces rise. Even discarding the fact that I will be simply bored, I can sit there until the current trifle, afraid to squeak in the direction of the Vorlon, grows to some Lantians and disperses me into cosmic dust without even scratching themselves. I didn't even want to consider more delirious options like bring peace to the whole world and happiness to everyone for free, because I can. Why on earth? I've never had to build a machine civilization. In terms of some kind of super task, it's already been built. Maybe it's not quite perfect and something can be improved, especially to suit my tastes. But all this will be strictly decorative, and the basis is already as perfect as it can. Bah. Seizing power in the galaxy? Well, I won't deny that this found some response in the human component of me. After all, the thirst to dominate is one of the fundamental instincts of a person, but this response was not so great that I would really harness myself to manage a crowd of motley space freaks, with a bunch of original quirks and simply unpleasant to me aesthetically. With people, maybe somehow. And even then, by and large, they are no different from everyone else. So it turned out that there was nothing special to do, and here the option of coming to Babylon and watching the unfolding spectacle of galactic proportions from the front rows was by no means the worst choice, in general. Now all I could do was wait. I had to give my fellows at the station time to arrive there, already having some kind of influence and information gathering capabilities. And I had to settle in this system. The replicators would build the ship in 20 minutes. Fortunately, I had collected a decent amount of resources in the Ragesh 3 system, but it was better to have something behind me. So, I had to wait a few weeks. A few boring weeks. But first of all, it is worthwhile to deal with the incomprehensible planet under Babylon. Back then, when flying away, it was not very reasonable to poke around there. But now, being several hundred light years away from it, one could afford to send a research ship to it. Obeying the command, the juniors assembled a scaled-down version of a standard Replicator cruiser, and Loki too jumped into hyperspace with instructions to stealthily enter orbit of the planet and, without attracting attention, begin a broadband scan and study of the infrastructure of the unknown machine below. I didn't have to wait long, and after 3 hours I was studying extremely interesting data. Under a small layer of rock on Epsilon 3 there really was a technological structure that would have inspired respect, perhaps even from the Alterans. In fact, almost the entire planet was a network of huge thermonuclear reactors that fed a gigantic anti-space defense complex that covered its entire surface, and a number of other very interesting systems that occupied most of the volume. There were also production facilities, but they were focused exclusively on maintaining the operability of the systems. There was no talk of any shipyards. There was also a population, some hunchbacked humanoids living in a tribal system, while by all indications they performed the role of service personnel and seemed to be of artificial origin. By all appearances, the planet was the pinnacle of technological thought of some vanished civilization. It is possible that one of the primordials, the technologies of execution, stood out too brightly against the general background of this galaxy. After transferring the replicators with the Asgard beam inside, I realized that I was not mistaken in my conclusions. It was incredible. The level of the creators was not lower than the Goa'uld, which is quite serious by local standards, and in some areas it could even compete with the Alterans. What is the controlled creation of time rifts worth? I, a human, also theoretically knew how to travel in time with the help of the Stargate, but only to the territory, and at the time where they already existed. Here it was possible to transfer entire squadrons, albeit with a huge strain of forces. A real Death Star. It even has its own Tarkin, only a humanist. And dying. The thing is that the control circuit of the entire system was closed to one single operator, a very old, practically dying humanoid, whose mind served as the operating system for the machine. The idea is not new, but it has its drawbacks. In particular, it is very dependent on the state of the biological component and the need for constant contact with it. It was the same here. Despite the possibility I discovered of maintaining a remote connection between the operator and the system, as well as extending his life, in the event of his sudden death, the entire system went to pieces. And the overload of reactors of such power and size, the largest reached 24 kilometers in diameter, it is... Ahem. Suffice it to say that very little will remain of half of the local planetary system, and I'm not even talking about Babylon 5 itself, it will simply evaporate. Well, the fact that the operator was a humanist was confirmed at least by the fact that neither before nor during the entire time of the construction of the Babylons did he show himself in any way. Of course, having found such a treasure trove of valuable technologies and knowledge, I simply could not up and leave. Especially since, as it turned out, this structure practically had no means of resisting the replicators that had already penetrated inside. And what's surprising about that, if even the Asgardians, who had been fighting my younger brothers for several millennia, could not find them. Kinetic weapons have long been in the past even in this galaxy. In addition, the current operator is barely pulling out the sleep mode. I don't know how much longer he will hold out, but if everything is left like this, then Babylon, for which I already have some plans, risks simply ceasing to exist in the most sudden way. However, to hell with self-justification. I just want this planet, and the directive for self-improvement sewn into the Replicator's code has almost nothing to do with it. Simple human greed is enough. So let's get started. Carefully, without haste, but thoroughly. And a month later, leaving the Replicator colony to continue extracting resources and providing me with a reliable rear, I decided to leave the chosen system and return to Babylon. As an experiment, in addition to the hyperdrive usual for my galaxy, a local analog was installed on the first built Super Hattak. Although upon closer examination, the technologies turned out to be completely different. Elementarily working with different dimensions. the common detail of which was only the ability to jump through them the distance in ordinary space. Everything else was different, starting from the principle of penetration and ending with the conditions of stay inside. Movement in degenerate space was much slower, but at the same time allowed maneuvering, even in reverse, and an almost unlimited time of stay, even if you colonized it. Which, by the way, was really real if there were cosmic bodies there. But the main motive for installing the appropriate engine was the idea that it was not worth immediately showing that the new race was not playing by the local rules. So for the third day now I have been admiring the red-black shimmer of degenerate space, sitting on a massive throne in the middle of the throne room, which also serves as the captain's bridge. Well, and mainly studied Epsilon 3, devoting most of my attention to the planet-absorbing replicators. True, I had to tinker a little with the subspace connection, refining the transmission method, taking into account the conditions of this space. But it took only a couple of minutes of work by the juniors, and even before I myself decided to penetrate here. The planets of the ancients, for some reason leaving almost no information about themselves in the databases, although they stored the history of a huge mass of living and previously living species, including even something about the originals, still present in the galaxy, never ceased to amaze me. I did not touch the Keeper and his assistants yet, on the area of the ball with a diameter of 5,000 kilometers. The replicators had where to hide and what to do, even after a month of continuous work. I did not arrange a mass gluttony, mainly concentrating on covertly intercepting control and studying the databases, and this was the right decision. Otherwise, the younger ones would have definitely destroyed several unique systems. By the way, this has already happened in the history of the Replicators. At the very beginning of the war with the Asgards, they could not yet assimilate many technologies, at best, turning the devices into scrap metal. The bugs of that time did not have enough intelligence and level of technical development to understand them. Even the current subspace connection, which unites all the blocks into a single collective mind, is a much later development, taken from the Asgard's own technologies. This is also why the war lasted so long. At the first stage, the replicators were only catching up with their opponents. Here I encountered a similar problem, the most obvious difficulty of which was the need to have telepathic abilities to operate some of the systems and capabilities of the complex. For example, such a thing as access to the so-called etheric network, which connects, no more and no less, all forms of life in the universe. Time and space do not exist in the ether. The paths of the ether can transfer the traveler to the past, present, or future. But for this, the user must have telepathic abilities. Precisely telepathic, as an independent physical phenomenon of the interaction of thought and reality. It was incredible. But it was. I could understand the structure of the mechanism, comprehend the physical principles of its operation. But even with all the computing power of the replicators, I could not use it. And there were many such things. Things that the replicator beetles would simply crunch for their own reproduction, as useless in themselves, and move on, but I could not. My hand did not rise. In short, I had something to occupy my mind and attention, so the flight passed almost unnoticed. Interlude. There is a disturbance in the 5th sector. This is... What's there? Ivanova asked tensely. There's no one on the schedule. I don't know, ma'am. But it's something very big. Pain. The lieutenant didn't have time to finish. At some distance from Babylon 5, a bright spark of light flared up in the cosmic void, which a moment later turned into a colossal funnel of hyperspace. Lord Almighty! Ivanova breathed out in amazement, looking at the huge object. According to the sensors, the ship, if it really was a ship, was more than 2 kilometers in diameter. In shape, it resembled a gray triangular pyramid, around the base of which a triangular structure was built with parts protruding to the sides like long spikes. It's bigger than a Vorlon heavy cruiser. The control room worker swallowed. And faster. Much faster. It was true that having entered normal space, the strange pyramid began, at an unprecedented speed, to approach the station. Delta! Lieutenant Ivanova grabbed the handrails with her hands, peering intently at the image on the monitor. The sensors can't read anything. Some kind of interference. Lieutenant! Only now did he notice the blinking signal of an incoming call. They're calling us. Well, turn on the connection and tell the commander it looks like we have first contact. An image of an unknown man with a neat beard, very similar to a human, appeared on the screen in front of the lieutenant. The man was sitting on a grey, monumental throne, behind the back of which a gilded wall with an intricate pattern could be discerned, and was dressed in a strange suit, the cut of which somehow reminded her of Ambassador Gikar. The man was silent, looking at the woman with slight interest. The lieutenant quickly pulled herself together. Ahem. Welcome to the Earth Commonwealth Station Babylon 5. I greet you too. The alien answered in a booming, completely unnatural voice with metallic notes, lightly touching his chin with the fingers of his right hand and slightly twisting his lips into a smile. My name is Baal, and I am the authorized representative of the Goa'uld Empire. According to the information I have, this station is a diplomatic facility of an interstate type. Is that so? Yes, it is neutral territory. Ivanova answered, shuddering inwardly. Another empire, how many of them have sprung up? In that case, I ask to be taken on board so that I can fulfill my mission. Mission? And I will discuss this with the commander of the village. I will inform the commander of your arrival. Thank you. Baal nodded and cut off the connection. After some time, a small vessel, apparently a shuttle, separated from the pyramid ship and, under the watchful eyes of the people on the bridge, headed towards the station's passenger dock. Lieutenant Ivanova. The communicator on Susan's hand came to life. What happened? Commander Sinclair. We have a first contact situation. A ship of an unknown race has just arrived and... It is a huge ship, sir. Its owner has introduced himself as a representative of some Goa'uld Empire and is currently heading to the station. As he said, he will discuss his mission only with you. The Goa'uld Empire? I've never heard of it before. Me too, sir. Should I send security to the third dock? I'll figure it out myself. Thank you, Lieutenant. Garibaldi, take the security squad and wait for me at the third dock. Fly, we have a guest. And probably the first contact, so be polite. Yes, Commander. We will do it in the best possible way. Commander Sinclair straightened his uniform jacket and, sighing heavily, quickly headed for the elevator. It wasn't enough for him to have squabbles between Londo and Gikar. Now some incomprehensible empire had shown up. And all today, when he had been trying all day to get the womanizing Centauri to finally start fulfilling his duties as ambassador and come to the negotiations regarding the disputed sector of space. Here is Babylon. Judging by the faces of the witnesses of my arrival, which I saw during the communication session, the ship made the right impression. Well, that was the plan. Now all that was left was to break through the commander's paranoia together with the head of security and get registration at the station. Well, yes, as I expected, before the phone had time to land in one of the docks of Babylon 5. Before I had time to leave it, I was already met by a whole delegation of 5 armed guards and their boss, personally. What was his name? Michael Garibaldi. An interesting meeting. With an expression of interest on my face, I study the guards and the weapons in their hands. True, I must give them credit, everything was polite and politically correct, the rifles were pointed at the floor. However, they are still not dangerous to me. Welcome to Babylon 5. Sinclair came around the corner at a quick pace. I am Commander Jeffrey Sinclair, commanding this station. My apologies for the reception, but we weren't expecting you. I understand. The Goa'uld voice with metallic overtones really suited the chosen image and role well, and at the same time it irritated the interlocutor with its unnaturalness. By the way, what would you do if in the traditions of my people meeting a guest with a weapon in hand was considered an insult and a reason to start a war? We smile and wave, smile and wave. For us, it's a sign of respect, the man said without batting an eyelid. The procedure is called honor guard. Usually, we agree on appropriate measures in advance when meeting the ambassador of a new race. But you appeared too suddenly. However, I think we could resolve the misunderstanding if it arose. That's reasonable. I nodded in the manner of the original Baal with a smile. I had worked long and hard on the behavioral program, and now all the necessary gestures and facial expressions came out extremely naturally. So, shall we go to your office, or will you give me a tour of the station? I would prefer the office first, if you don't mind, of course. Sinclair smiled politely, making an inviting gesture. No way, business comes first. The walk to the office passed in silence. I suspect that Sinclair simply had no idea what he could talk about with me. That would be nothing at all, and I was in no hurry to give him topics, pretending to be a tourist and looking around. Well, sitting down at his desk, the commander clearly immediately felt more confident. How should I address you? Lord Bale, I think that would be most appropriate, I answered with an ironic smile, without asking, settling down on the visitor's sofa. Lord Bale, first of all, I would like to clarify several important issues related to your appearance on the station. Of course. Ask. I don't promise to answer all your questions, but I'll try to satisfy your curiosity. The most important thing is, why are you here? You told Lieutenant Ivanova that you'd arrived on some mission. True. I am authorized to inform the local community of intelligent species that the Goa'uld Empire intends to establish an outpost in this galaxy. We have studied your navigational charts and the boundaries of current political entities, and have decided that this territory, a casual gesture of the hand and a holographic map of the galaxy unfolds above Sinclair's desk, on which a section colored bright blue stands out, is suitable for us. The man stared at the shining spiral in shock. I wasn't being modest. I took a 13th part right away, naturally away from most of the local powers. It wasn't difficult. They, with the exception of the Vorlon, were actually very small. Other junior system lords of the Goa'uld owned more territory. Here, however, it was much more difficult with habitable planets, and the gate system did not exist. Therefore, huge spaces lay empty, but even taking them into account, most of the local so-called League of Non-Aligned Worlds have only one inhabited world. And against this background, I, so beautiful, declare that I will take a 13th part of the galaxy. Are you serious? The commander managed to control himself. An outpost in several billion systems? We are an intergalactic state, I smiled disarmingly. Ahem. Lord Baal, Sinclair began a little hesitantly. This is a very serious matter. I do not have the authority to decide it alone, especially since your statement may affect the interests of other nations. Yeah, and the Vorlons might also be outraged, but you don't know about that. Commander Sinclair, you seem to have misunderstood. The smile that had been playing across my face all this time became even more friendly. I did not come here to get permission. My task is to inform you, simply to avoid ambiguity in our relations. What do you mean? The essence is in the concept of freedom of choice. It is, of course, ephemeral. Nevertheless, whenever possible, we prefer to give it. Now, your reconnaissance ships will not be able to honestly declare that they did not know where they were going. Of course, the lost, I emphasize the quotation marks, will still appear, but their fate will be your choice. Can you imagine the excitement this news will cause? Of course. But unrest is not a total massacre. They will worry and get used to it. You are used to the Vorlon. Do the Vorlons also have an intergalactic state? Sinclair raised his eyebrows. I don't know about this. I turn off the hologram. Although I dare to assume that they have the capabilities for this. Do you wish to address the council? That's why I came. Commander Sinclair rubbed his hands tiredly across his face. The day had certainly been longer than he would have liked. In that case, I suggest we interrupt our conversation. It's late, and the council won't meet for at least 12 hours. He spread his hands. There are too many ambassadors who consider their personal rest more important than their duties. I understand, Commander. I nod with a sympathetic smile. Creatures in power rarely value other people's time. Then please forgive me. Sinclair stood up, pressing a couple of buttons on the computer panel of the table. You will be shown to the guest quarters. I hope it will not be undiplomatic that I do not offer quarters in the embassy sector. The cabin there cannot be prepared so quickly. There was tension in the commander's voice. He really could not do anything. I had appeared too unexpectedly, but in him, like no one else, lived the memory of the reasons for the beginning of the Earth-Minbari conflict. And he did not want a repeat at all. No need, Commander. I am perfectly aware that I have appeared suddenly. I ironically stroked the tip of my beard, a familiar gesture of the original bell, as a temporary measure, until all the formalities are settled. An ordinary cabin for honored guests will suit me quite well, don't worry. Thank you, Lord Bale, Manus. Garibaldi will show you the way, and tomorrow, as soon as the council meets, you can deliver your message to them. I stood up, bowed briefly, and headed for the office exit. The head of security was already waiting for me in the corridor, leaning against the wall with an independent air, his hands in his trouser pockets. As soon as I appeared in his field of vision, Garibaldi lazily peeled himself away from the wall and measured me with a suspicious glance. Well, innate paranoia is not the worst quality for a head of security. Lord Bell, he nodded briefly. Mr. Garibaldi, I replied in kind. Follow me, please. It seemed that Garibaldi had no plans to entertain his honored guest with an exciting conversation. He walked the entire way in silence, with the imperturbability of a man who had seen everything in his time. I, too, had no desire to communicate and simply followed, looking at the surrounding corridors. The inhabitants of the station we met did not even deign to glance at our procession. I looked like a human being, although I was dressed somewhat unconventionally. But at a station like Babylon, this would have interested few people. Your cabin, Lord Baal. Garibaldi took a pass card from his pocket, opened the door for her, and handed it to me. Tomorrow, as soon as the time of the council's convocation is known, you will be informed over the intercom. I chuckled and nodded to Garibaldi, accepting the card as I stepped inside. The cabin was small, but furnished with some pretension to luxury. The door closed behind me with a soft rustle, and I sat down on the sofa leaning back. Interlude. As soon as Lord Baal left the office, Sinclair sighed with relief, leaning back in his chair. Despite his welcoming smile and polite demeanor, somewhere deep down, subconsciously, the guest evoked a sense of threat and danger. No, experience told the station commander that the Goa'uld really intended to avoid open conflict until the last possible moment. But the same experience promised that tomorrow would be even more difficult than today. And you don't have to be a prophet to predict the League's reaction to the alien's statement. The ringing of the call made him shudder, and a look at the caller caused him to sigh heavily. Hello, Ambassador Delaine, Sinclair replied, trying to make his face look welcoming and polite. Good evening, Commander. I hope I haven't disturbed you too much. Not at all, Ambassador. Sinclair smiled as cordially as he could. Did you want something? Commander Sinclair, I have learned that a ship of a new unknown race has appeared near the station. Is this true? Yes, Ambassador, that is so. They say the ship is huge. Is it military? What kind of race is it? Where is it from? Ambassador, I don't know much more than you do. Lord Bale and I had a short conversation, during which he expressed a desire to address the Babylon 5 Council with a statement from his people. I believe we will learn more about it there. Sinclair paused. As for the ship, we don't know. The ship is indeed large, more than 2 kilometers in diameter, but that's all we know for sure. Our scanners were unable to obtain any information other than interference. Okay, thank you, Commander. Delaine's face briefly showed concern mixed with deep thoughtfulness. I hope everything will become clearer tomorrow. Good night, Ambassador. Good night. Having finished the conversation, Sinclair got up from the table and decided to be on the safe side, not to stay in the office any longer. Surely more than one Minbari had found out about the guest, and Sinclair was not at all happy to be the one who would be the first to bring Bale's notice to the council. And they would ask him, Commander Sinclair. Jeffrey involuntarily looked up at the ceiling, sighing deeply. Here it goes. He hadn't even reached the turn when he heard a painfully familiar voice. The voice whose owner he had been trying to get to sit down at the negotiating table all day. Commander, wait. What do you want, Lundo? He answered wearily. You turned important negotiations into a farce. I don't know what your business is. I know. The Centaurian interrupted him. I lost my head because of a pretty face. Sinclair, I beg you, help me. What are you talking about? The madness of today continued and seemed to have no intention of ending. Odira, she robbed me. The foundations of the Centauri Republic are at risk. My career is dying. There was undisguised despair in Londo's voice. It seemed the girl really meant a lot to him, and that was why her actions had hit him so hard. Breathing a sigh of relief that he would not be questioned about Belle a second time, the commander switched to a new task. Is the security service aware? No. The ambassador recoiled, almost frightened. The matter cannot be given an official course. Extreme caution is needed. Only you, Sinclair, my faithful friend, can help. The last words caused a slight nervous tick in the commander, suppressed with great difficulty. If I help you, the commander began cautiously, will you compromise on the Euphrates Treaty? Aye. Molari exhaled resignedly, nodding. I'll even seal it with a kiss, Kaka. We'll be happy. Sinclair shook his head. Okay, Londo. I'll help. You have no idea what you do for me, Sinclair. Thank you so much. The commander twitched his cheek, letting Londo go ahead of him back into the office. It looked like he wasn't going to get much sleep tonight. Yes, Commander. The ambassador turned around as he walked, his spirits rising. Have I heard of some new one? Is it his ship that is hanging near the Babylon now? Why did this happen to me? Being a replicator imposed certain peculiarities on many everyday trifles. For example, I absolutely did not need sleep. No, it was possible to imitate it by turning off the interfaces for receiving information. But not only was this just a parody, but even in this state I still continued to passively process a lot of information, analyze the available data. Surely this could not be considered dreams. Yes, even using nighttime to plan further actions and develop their optimal set was stupid. The younger ones were multiplying at full speed, absorbing the resources of the system I had chosen, and my computing power had already reached such a large value that it was more difficult to figure out where to use it. Without even thinking, without consciously noticing it, I constantly analyzed and processed the available information. It even became somehow offensive. The majority of intellectual capabilities remained practically unclaimed. The only result of my nightly vigils could be considered the recognition of myself as an illogical idiot. Having thought over the actions taken since my arrival on this world, many were recognized as irrational. For example, by leaving a group of replicators to gather information about Babylon 5, I missed the opportunity to leave them a team to, if possible, sneak onto the ships of the League races for subsequent transfer to their home planets. Such a spy network would have been very useful for monitoring the events of the galaxy firsthand. Of course, it is never too late to do this. And it was a bit early then to fuss about without anything behind you, but still in a mission. I was brought out of my thoughts by a call signal from the display on the table. Has the whole night already passed or something? Lord Bale, Sinclair greeted me. Judging by his face, he hadn't had a good night's sleep. The Babylon 5 Advisory Council is assembled and ready to hear your statement. If you'd like, Lieutenant Ivanova will be here in a few minutes to escort you to the boardroom. Thank you, Commander. I nod, feigning a welcoming smile. Commander Sinclair. Ambassador Molari's voice was even more displeased than usual. How long must we wait? Why have you called the council so early? Ambassador, be patient. You will find out everything soon. Besides, Ambassador Kosh is missing. He won't come, as always. The Centaurian grumbled. leaning back in his chair and taking a sip of the steaming drink from the massive golden cup with which he had come into the meeting room. At this point, Ivanova and I approached the passage to the conference room. I nodded my thanks to the lieutenant and slowly walked to the middle, greeting the ambassadors sitting at the table with a short half bow. The League members, sitting in a semicircle on the opposite side, were also given the same greeting. They looked at me with surprise, not really understanding who I was and what I was doing there. "Dear ambassadors," Sinclair sighed nervously, preparing for what was to come, and stood up from the table. "Many of you, I think, are aware of the appearance of a ship of an unknown configuration near Babylon 5, which emerged from hyperspace at the end of yesterday." "Yes, Commander Sinclair." Ambassador Drazi interrupted him in a displeased tone, glancing sideways in my direction. "And the League of Non-Aligned Worlds would like to know what kind of race this is, and why did they send a battlecruiser to the Babylon?" "Ahem. I suppose it would be better to get answers to your questions from the original source." The commander waved his hand, pointing at me. "Lord Baal, please." "Thank you, Commander Sinclair," I say, bowing slightly to the top of the council again with a smile. "What does this mean?" Ambassador Drazi jumped up. "Are you making fun of us? Even with the naked eye, it is clear that this is a man. Is this a provocation from Earth?" Cough, cough. Continuing to smile politely, I turned to him. "Ambassador, I would not like to debunk your confidence, but I am not a human." "But you look like a human. You speak as if you have never seen Centauri or Minbari. Besides, to be honest, it should be noted that these people look more like representatives of my species. Believe me, this is much more logical, considering the youth of their civilization." "No offense, Commander." I spread my hands, turning towards Sinclair with a feigned guilty look. "What do you mean by that?" Delenn asked tensely. "Just what I said." Another smile. "But let's get down to business. My name is Baal. I am the authorized representative of the Goa'uld Empire, and I came to Babylon 5 because it is the only international diplomatic station in your galaxy." "The galaxy?" Londo, who'd been sipping from his cup the whole time, choked on his drink. "Yes, Ambassador. And I came here to notify the Council and the League, as representatives of the most influential races, of our Empire's intention to establish a small," Sinclair coughed, "outpost not far from your territories. As I already told the Commander, we have studied the existing political borders of your states, so I believe there should be no problems with mutual territorial claims." "What do you mean by outpost?" Delenn seems to have taken over as chair of the council since Sinclair did not. "Oh," I smile. "Just a modest area of territory." I waved my hand, and a holographic map of the galaxy appeared in the air in front of me, which I had already shown to Sinclair. "Our outpost will be located here." The 13th part of the galaxy was painted gold. The faces of everyone present, except Sinclair, who already knew what was going on, showed confusion and uncertainty. "Excuse me, Ambassador Baal." "Lord Baal," I corrected the Minbari with a smile. "That would be more correct. Lord Baal, but where exactly will your outpost be? You showed quite a large territory. There are billions of systems there." "You misunderstood a little." An ironic smile. "This is our outpost." "What?" Sinclair sat in a hand-face pose, trying not to look at the ambassadors. Londo choked on his drink again, coughing and putting the cup away from himself, and Delenn and Jikar, who exclaimed almost in unison, looked at me with an expression of complete bewilderment on their faces. "Ambassador Delenn," I began earnestly, "the Goa'uld Empire is an intergalactic entity. For you it may seem like a huge chunk of space, but for us it is only an acceptable minimum. But we cannot allow you to seize such vast territories. It is outrageous." Another League ambassador jumped up from his seat. "None of the League members." "I beg your pardon." I put my palms forward to interrupt the ambassador's monologue. "Ahem. Yes, your apology is accepted, but your joke was a bit..." I did not finish. The smile that had been wandering across my face all this time faded. giving way to a serious expression. This was in no way a joke. I solemnly declare that it is precisely this space, the 13th part of your galaxy, that we have planned for development and colonization. The ambassador tried to say something again, but hesitated under my gaze. Moreover, you were probably misled by my friendliness, but my words are not a request. I have arrived to notify, I emphasize this word with my voice, about the arrival of our empire in your galaxy. But there is no need to worry and panic. I smile a friendly smile again. The Goa'uld are extremely little interested in the affairs of other species. Your resources, territories, politics, we do not care about this. We only try to observe some elementary rules of politeness. In addition, my appearance here is also a test of your adequacy. A stunned silence fell over the council chamber. Commander Sinclair still sat with his face in his hand, but his entire posture expressed tension. Jakar and Londo were simply in shock. The Centauri ambassador seemed to be completely stunned, not even noticing that the goblet in his hand had tilted and the remains of the drink were dripping onto his knee. Lord Bal! And again, Delen was the first to control herself. This... A very serious statement on your part. Such spaces. You understand, of course, that our governments will be extremely unhappy with the new state of affairs in the galaxy. Yes, the territories you indicated do not really belong to anyone present here. But many races are now only on the path to large-scale colonization. And your arrival will put an end to this. I'm not even talking about... She hesitated, choosing her words. Relics of ancient races. This is a colossal loss for historians and archaeologists. Ambassador Delen, I can understand your concern, but let's be frank. We have studied, as far as possible, the territorial claims of the races present here. Most of them have only one habitable mother planet, and a few industrial or agricultural colonies, and even then, most often in the same planetary system. And this state of affairs has been going on for almost a millennium. Don't you think that at this rate, even the rest of the galaxy will be enough for you for a very, very long time? Delen flinched slightly at my words about the 1,000-year term, and her gaze in my direction became more wary and tense. Does she suspect me of something? In any case, Sinclair said, we will all need to contact our governments. I suspect that the esteemed ambassadors, like myself, are not authorized to make a decision on your application alone, Lord Bal. Of course, Commander Sinclair. I nod with polite smile, stroking my beard with my fingers in a Bale manner. In that case, I suppose we will have to reconvene the council when everyone receives an answer from their materializes. If someone decides to declare war on us, I will listen to them with pleasure. We will select a cabin in the embassy sector, unless of course you require very specific environmental conditions. No need to worry, Commander. The standard atmosphere of your station will suit me just fine. Well, that's easier. I'll let you know when the cabin is ready. Sinclair sighed. In that case, I suggest we break off for now and reconvene when we receive our government's response. The hall began to buzz with the voices of the League ambassadors who had come to their senses, protesting against my speech. But the commander's proposal seemed reasonable, so no one present showed active discontent. With a short bow, I turned and left the council hall, returning to the guest apartments. I wonder how many races there will be that will not accept my rather harsh statement. And how many of them will react to it harshly and negatively. I had almost reached the corridor leading to my cabin when Ambassador Kosh's broad figure came around the corner, moving at a measured and unhurried pace. I felt his close attention on my absent skin. The Vorlon stood in the middle of the corridor, almost completely blocking my way. "Who are you?" came a rather peculiar voice from the ambassador's vocabulator. "What do you want?" Without taking my eyes off him, I smiled politely. Kosh froze warily and his eye diaphragm curled up almost to a point. I don't know how a figure that looks like a coat hanger can freeze warily, but that's exactly the feeling I got. He was probably trying to read my thoughts, but I seriously doubted that it was possible in principle. But even if we assumed that he would see, considering that even now, a certain, and quite significant, part of my mind was busy coordinating the actions of the juniors in the system being developed. Every second, I was passing through myself such volumes of information that even an Asgard or a true Goa'uld's brain would boil, and their physiology is specially, so to speak, sharpened for handling huge layers of data. The silence dragged on. I was silent, patiently waiting for an answer. Kosh. Well, I thought, most likely. I'll give you a hint, my original friend. I decide to break the pause, of course, having calculated all the possible consequences of my words. Who are you? And smiling once more, I walk on, gently skirting the Vorlon. It seems that my behavior really puzzled the ambassador, because the rest of the journey passed without any surprises. Chapter 3. It's a wonderful night, isn't it? If the weakest squad cannot destroy the hero, it is worth sending the strongest one there, and not sending squads at him in increasing numbers, while the hero is moving towards the fortress. Dark Lord Rule 80. Once in my cabin, I sat down on the couch and waited for the apartments in the embassy sector to be prepared. At the same time, out of boredom, I once again began to look through all the information available in the databases on the Vorlons in general and Kosh in particular. Surprisingly, there was very little of it, that is, somewhere on the level of what I managed to blab about the Goa'uld Empire, if not less. No medical data, although there was some for other races, no physiological features, no historical background. Only fragmentary information about the political system and some assumptions of scientists on the technological base of this race. It felt as if the Vorlons did not exist at all, and they were just someone's invention. Kosh lived on the alien level of the diplomatic sector, in an area for species with a non-oxygen atmosphere. But that didn't mean anything, since I vaguely remembered from canon that the Vorlons always wore a closed-loop spacesuit and, although they took it off in their cabin, they couldn't care less about the atmosphere. It seemed that Kosh had settled there to use the toxic atmosphere as a last line of defense in case of an attack, or simply to confuse everyone even more. The ambassador's secrecy extended to his ship as well. It was in a separate, closed dock, access to which, except for senior officers of Babylon 5, and even then with cautious permission, was not even allowed by the station's technicians. Of course, laws are made to be broken, and curious workers sneaked in there. And this gave rise to many rumors about the ship flying around among the inhabitants. Judging by the lack of reaction, the Vorlon was quite satisfied with such advertisement. After 1 hour, 15 minutes and 43 seconds, I was brought out of my thoughts by a signal from the front door. Who's there? Lord Baal, this is Lieutenant Ivanova. A voice came from the speaker. I have come to escort you to the embassy cabin that we have prepared. Thank you, Madam Lieutenant. I left the cabin with a good-natured smile. Lead the way. The new cabin was much more comfortable, which is not surprising, since this is the cabin for the head of the diplomatic mission. The apartment consisted of a large living room, a partitioned area with a bed, a shower with a toilet, and some kind of kitchen. During the inspection, I found another door leading to a small room with a bed, a closet, a table, a chair. It seems that this is the workplace for the ambassador's assistant, at least at the council. There was another Centauri behind Londo, who handed the ambassador a cup with a drink. The sound of the intercom came from the living room, and I had to turn away from studying the cabin and take the call. A previously unknown black man was looking at me from the screen. Ambassador Baal, I'm sorry to disturb you. Lord Baal would be more correct. Excuse me. Lord Baal, I am Benjamin Franklin, Chief Medical Officer of Babylon 5. I'm listening, Mr. Franklin. I sat down on the chair near the intercom, leaning back. Did you want something? Yes. As far as I know, you arrived at the station as an ambassador of a new race. If possible, I would like to ask you to come to the medical lab for examination, and also to provide me with data on your physiology in case of, unforeseen situations. No need. I smiled broadly. There's no need for that. You have nothing to worry about. But this is my job, the medic said discontentedly. I am very glad that you treat her responsibly, but I repeat, there is no need for this. You are not pursuing Ambassador Kosh with a proposal to be examined, I answered with slight malice. And I am not sure that the level of your technology allows you to examine me at all. But do not worry, representatives of my species do not get sick in principle. But Franklin still had a displeased expression on his face, which became even more displeased when I mentioned Kosh. I immediately remembered a short entry in the station's log that some time ago there had been some incident involving the Vorlon ambassador and the then head doctor, as a result of which the vacancy had appeared. There were no details, which was not surprising given the ambassador's secrecy, but it seemed that medicine and the Vorlons were a sore subject for any fanatical medic. I assure you, I leaned closer to the screen confidentially. You won't have to worry about my medical care. It's less trouble for you, don't you think? You haven't convinced me, the doctor grumbled, but so be it. In that case, I apologize for disturbing you. No need, Mr. Franklin, no need. I disconnected the connection with a welcoming smile. No, of course. I suppose it would be easy for the nanites to fabricate the insides of a human body. Well, maybe add some physiological differences since I'm a guest from another galaxy. But it's better this way. At the same time, it fits well into the overall appearance of a more developed civilization. Interlude. The bridge of Babylon 5 was quiet, a night shift. The control room workers relaxed at their terminals, occasionally glancing with interest and caution at the pyramidal bulk of the ship hanging not far from the station. Still, I don't understand anything. Kyle, who was responsible for the short-range scanners, grumbled irritably. We can even scan Minbari and Vorlon ships. And here there's a solid cloud of interference. Don't worry about it. Did you hear what the guys are saying? This is a representative of some ancient race, almost cooler than the Vorlons, who came here on a diplomatic mission. They say the council stood on their heads for several hours, especially the League. It's not surprising. After all, it's not every day that a flying pyramid a third the size of Babylon appears. It would be fine if he just flew in. There are rumors here that the guest spoke before the League and said that they are going to take almost a quarter of the free territory of the galaxy. How much? Kyle stared at his interlocutor in amazement. Well, maybe they are lying, but such rumors don't appear out of nowhere. Unscheduled arrival. 5 ships. What? Who is this? Drazi cruisers. Shit. Kyle stared at the monitor, reading the sensor readings. Lieutenant Ivanova, this is control room. Sergeant, will I ever be able to get enough sleep or not? The lieutenant's dissatisfied voice rang out. Unscheduled arrival, 5 Drazi cruisers, heading toward the station on an attack course. Weapons at the ready. Your mother. Judging by the sounds from the communicator, Ivanova seemed to have fallen out of bed, getting tangled in the blanket. I'm coming. Cruiser Drazi, this is Babylon 5 dispatcher. Respond. Damn, they're not responding. 5 minutes and they'll be in attack range. Did they answer the call? Ivanova asked first as she ran onto the bridge, buttoning the last buttons of her jacket as she went. No, Lieutenant. Cruiser Drazi. This is Lieutenant Ivanova. Babylon 5, disable your weapons. Do you understand that your actions will lead to war? Damn it. Who's in the crosshairs, Sergeant? 1 cruiser is locked onto us. 4 are heading towards... The dispatcher checked the sensor readings. They are heading towards the pyramid ship. It's even worse. Ivanova groaned. It will be a diplomatic scandal. Defensive systems on combat alert. Delta unit, take off. Urgently. They won't make it in time. Commander Sinclair, this is Lieutenant Susan Ivanova speaking. I'm listening, Lieutenant. 5 Drazi cruisers have emerged from hyperspace and are heading towards the station on an attack course. 4 are aimed at our guest's ship. 1 at us. Damn it. I'll be there now. My God. Ivanova grabbed the handrail near the main console with her hands, watching the unfolding action with tension. In her mind, The lieutenant counted the painfully long seconds of emergency readiness for the support fighters, also realizing that they would not make it in time. Lieutenant, the Drazis are opening fire on the pyramid. The 4 cruisers, finally within striking distance, opened fire on the Goa'uld ambassador's ship. What the hell? Kyle muttered in shock, watching as the first shots that reached the ship didn't even leave a scorch mark on its hull. The plasma bolts simply died out when they collided with the Huttak's hull. Lieutenant, look. What? Ivanova, who had closed her eyes in resignation and was already mentally preparing for a scandal and a multi-hour showdown between the Goa'uld ambassador and the Drazi with a subsequent declaration of war, cautiously looked out the porthole. It can't be. Drazi cruiser, over. The lieutenant made another attempt. Cease fire. This is Lieutenant Ivanova speaking. Babylon 5, cease fire. This is a diplomatic vessel belonging to the ambassador. They're not responding, Lieutenant. The dispatcher shook his head. What's going on? Keep calling. Cruiser Drazi, over. This is Lieutenant Ivanova speaking. Ahem. Good night, Madam Lieutenant. After about 5 attempts, a wheedling voice came from behind the woman, causing her to noticeably flinch. Turning her head, she saw Baal, looking at what was happening in the porthole with noticeable interest. Ahem. Lord Baal? Concentrating on trying to get through to the Drazi, Susan completely failed to notice when he managed to approach her from behind. A wonderful view, don't you think? The Goa'uld continued calmly. But I am still a little curious. What is the reason for this salute? Would you mind dispelling my curiosity, Madam Lieutenant? The ambassador said with his usual polite, slightly ironic smile. It seemed that he was not at all bothered by the fact that it was his ship that was being fired upon by the Drazi battlecruisers. Lord Baal, Ivanova collected her thoughts, trying to figure out how to resolve the unpleasant situation. I apologize, I am trying to contact the ships that attacked your vessel. But, so this is an attack? Here it is. Bale seemed even happy, drawled, smiling and turning his gaze back to the observation window. And at that very moment, the ambassador's ship finally responded. 5 shots, 5 brightly shining clots of energy merging into a line, 5 flashes of explosions, and 5 clouds of space debris, all that was left of the attackers. Well, then everything became clear. Good night, Madam Lieutenant. The ambassador bowed briefly to Ivanova. Have a good shift. Turning slowly and continuing to smile at his thoughts, Lord Ball headed towards the exit of the bridge. Ivanova, report. Sinclair almost ran into the door, almost crashing into the smiling ambassador. Oh, Commander Sinclair. He nodded affably. A wonderful night, isn't it? Goodbye, Commander. Ambassador Delaine pulled the hood of her silver robe over her head, completely hiding her face, and confidently walked into the darkened hall. The tradition of convening the Grey Council outside of their homeland was sometimes extremely inconvenient. But tradition is tradition, and it was not for her to go against the centuries-old foundations of her people, especially since they were justified from the point of view of common sense and logic. It was also a relief that the seat of the council was the Valenta, a Charlene-class cruiser, upgraded with the latest technology. So Delaine immediately, as soon as the scandalous meeting of the advisory council ended, sent a summons to the council and, boarding a diplomatic transport, flew out of Babylon 5. What event prompted you, Delaine? As soon as the girl walked into a spot of light in the middle of the dark hall, 9 more illuminated areas appeared around, in 8 of which stood figures wrapped in cloaks. To urgently convene the Grey Council? An ambassador from a new race has arrived on Babylon V5. And what's unusual about that? A voice interrupted her from the other side. Babylon is a diplomatic station of people. It was built specifically for ambassadors of different races to fly there. Let me finish, Neroon. Delaine turned to the speaker with displeasure. They're an unknown race. New. None of the younger races have ever even seen their ships, and one of them just appeared out of hyperspace at the station. The universe is big, Delaine. Another figure spread his hands. Tell us, what impressed you so much about the new ambassador that it was necessary to convene the council? He introduced himself as a representative of the Goa'uld race. Lord Baal, as he calls himself, claimed to represent a civilization from another galaxy, and came here as an authorized representative of the Goa'uld Empire to notify us of the planned colonization of the free region of space. From another galaxy, the worker caste representative exclaimed in amazement. How is that possible? We must find out how much truth there is in his statements. What else do you know about the alien Delen? This is his ship. The Minbari woman chuckled darkly, raising her hand and turning on the hall's holographic system. A clear image of Baal's hat-tuck, filmed by Delen's departing ship, appeared on the translucent sheet of air that descended from above. And this is Babylon 5. An image of the station appeared next to the ship. Incredible. Such dimensions. Delen, is the scale accurate? Yes, absolutely. This ship is more than 2 kilometers in diameter. And that's not the most important thing. What else? Their technological level. I couldn't scan it. The sensors only showed a cloud of strange interference. Either they build ships on completely different principles, even though the pyramid arrived through a normal hyperspace funnel, or they are technologically more advanced than Minbar. This requires further research. With the Council's permission, the warrior caste will try to learn everything possible about the new race and their ships. Okay, Nerun. Just don't bring it to an open confrontation. We still know too little to provoke the aliens into conflict. And that's not the worst news. Delen continued. Lord Baal made a statement to the Council, as I said, about the Goa'uld's plans to colonize territories in our galaxy. This, a map of the galaxy with a highlighted section appeared in front of the Council, is the territory where they plan to establish their outpost. Well, okay. It's not too close to our borders. But where exactly will the outpost be? You don't understand, Delen sighed, remembering Baal's smile as he delivered the news. This is their outpost, a 13th of our galaxy. A tense silence fell over the Grey Council Hall. Is this a joke, Delen? Nerun's voice broke the silence. No, that is exactly the statement Baal made. And that is why I called the Grey Council. The 8 illuminated figures disappeared, hidden by the darkness. Delen closed her eyes tiredly, but remained patiently standing in the center of the illuminated area, waiting for the council to finish discussing the news brought by one of its members. This was the part of the council that irritated her greatly. With Dukhat, everything was simpler. He held the council in his hands, not allowing it to make mistakes. The council has made its decision, Delen. A single figure emerged from the darkness, approaching the circle of light in which the girl stood. Return to the Babylon. We still have to watch over Sinclair. No one has relieved you of that responsibility. In the meantime, try to learn as much as you can about this Baal and his race. The appearance of such a force cannot be ignored. Nerun will find out what he can in his own way, but do everything possible to keep him from taking too drastic action. Minbar does not need a second war. There are too many lost souls already. The Minbari bowed and, turning around, quickly left the hall. What do you want, Gakar? The displeased face of Advisor Durog, one of the Khari, looked at the ambassador from the screen. I am also extremely glad to see you, Durog. The Narn grinned. How is your health? I hope not too well. You won't get it. Let me repeat again. What did you want? I have a message for all Khari. A representative of a new race has arrived on Babylon 5. What do we care? Gakar, some ambassadors from other races are of no importance to us. We must concentrate on the Centauri. While they are stunned by what happened at Ragish 3, we can take advantage of their weakness. You're still the same, Durog. Gakar shook his head. Put aside your hostility towards me for a moment and start looking at the world soberly. I would personally tear your head off with great pleasure, but I'm forced to just communicate. Okay, Gakar, the Narn almost growled. Say what you wanted to say quickly, and let's finish here. A new ambassador. He suddenly showed up at Babylon. Gikar started speaking in harsh phrases. He called himself a representative of a race from another galaxy. He made the most insolent demands to the station council. And the Narn hesitated. What else? Their race is technologically extremely advanced. What does extremely developed mean? Suffice it to say that the Drazi cruisers couldn't even scratch its hull. Durog stared at his interlocutor in surprise. The Drazi, of course, weren't distinguished by a high level of technological development. But a cruiser is a cruiser. It doesn't matter whose plasma cannons are shooting at you. Are you kidding, Gikar? If only. With a sigh, the Narn inserted a data crystal into the terminal socket and sent the data to Durog. See for yourself. These are recordings from external surveillance cameras. Don't ask how I got them. There was a tense silence for a while the advisor received the data and studied the recording. Gikar. Durog suddenly became serious. This is a very serious force. I think all Khari will agree that we simply must try to establish communication with them. Do you understand? Such an alliance will allow Narn to regain its former strength and finally show the Centauri where their place is. You're not a fool. You figured it out already, the ambassador grumbled. And what about the reaction to his statement? What will be the official position of Narn? Yes. A statement. What exactly was the impudence of his demands? He spoke before the council to inform. Gikar emphasized the last word. The League and us of the Goa'uld Empire's intentions to establish an outpost of their civilization in our galaxy. That is, he didn't ask permission. Exactly. And that's not the most impudent thing. The territory on which this outpost will be located is, a fairly large area of our galaxy. Several systems? The advisor raised an eyebrow in confusion. Several? Yes. 1/13th part of the galaxy. Now Durog was silent for much longer, and Gikar had a chance to enjoy the expression on his old rival's face, and it warmed the Narn's soul pleasantly. Finally, having overcome his surprise, the advisor looked tensely at his interlocutor. The Khari must discuss this. I trust the territories he has chosen do not affect our interests? No, everything is done demonstratively, politely, and carefully. The territories do not belong to any of the races known to us, so... Good. Then our position for now will be as follows. Durog paused, collecting his thoughts. Since the claims of the new race do not affect the interests of the Narn regime, we will have nothing against the establishment of an outpost. Well, and the general mood for mutually beneficial relations. We must try to get the Goa'uld as allies. Clear. In that case, until next time, Gikar. I hope it doesn't happen. Same to you, Durog. I hope to hear about how you break your neck. Gikar cut off the connection and leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the table. So, we will establish contact. Commander Sinclair sat in his office, thoughtfully looking at the terminal monitor in front of him. He had to write a report for the Senate, and he had almost finished it, but literally 15 minutes later, Ivanova called him, reporting the arrival of an unknown ship. And from that very moment, everything went topsy-turvy. The new arrival, despite looking human, introduced himself as a representative of a previously unknown race living in another galaxy. This alone was enough to start banging his head on the table, from the need to make a bunch of edits to the report and write a detailed description of this event. But the new ambassador did not stop there. First at a personal meeting, and then before the full council of Babylon 5, Lord Bell, as the alien introduced himself, made a statement unprecedented in its impudence, which astounded representatives of all races on the station without exception. Well, or almost all of them, Ambassador Kosh, as always, did not show up for the meeting. He announced that the Goa'uld civilization, of which he is a representative, intends to establish an outpost in this galaxy for its subsequent colonization. This alone can cause indignation in any state and any civilization. And when he showed the territory they plan to occupy, well, that's why it was brought at such an inopportune time. Sinclair looked at the open text of the monthly report once again with a heavy sigh, thought about it and sent it as it was written. It was easier to tell shocking news to the senator personally. Looking at his watch, the commander sighed again and sent a call to Senator Kingsley. "Good evening, Commander Sinclair." The man responded literally a few seconds later, as if he had been waiting for this call, sitting at the terminal. "What did you want to tell me?" "Senator Kingsley, good evening. Did you receive my report?" "Got it." The senator glanced at the corner of his monitor, apparently having received notification of an incoming shipment. "Just now. Is this the only reason you called?" "No, Senator. My report, it is not complete. But before you get indignant, let me explain the situation." His interlocutor frowned, but nodded. 3 days ago, an unidentified ship came out of hyperspace near the station, enormous, the size of a Vorlon heavy cruiser. It came out into normal space and stopped at the Babylon. Sinclair fell silent, choosing his wording. "Continue, Commander," said the frowning senator, pressing several buttons on the terminal. "I have switched our channel to an encrypted frequency. Someone from the ship contacted us, introducing himself as Lord Bale and calling himself, an ambassador of the Goa'uld Empire, who had come to Babylon 5 as a representative of his race. He also asked to meet with me as the commander of the station for a private conversation." "What did he want?" Lord Bell reported that he had arrived at the station to make a statement to the council, since Babylon is an international facility, and representatives of most advanced civilizations are present there. "What statement?" The senator seemed to tense up even more, waiting for him to continue. "Oh, nothing significant." Sinclair allowed himself a wry smile. "He just, I quote, came to notify us of the Goa'uld Empire's intentions to establish an outpost of their state in our galaxy." "What? In our galaxy?" "Yes, Senator. Lord Bell introduced himself as an ambassador of a civilization living in another galaxy. Moreover, according to him, their empire is of intergalactic proportions." Senator Kingsley looked at the commander in amazement, digesting the information he had received. Do you understand, Sinclair, what this event means?" "I can guess." The commander grimaced again, especially after he announced the territories on which the outpost will be built. Hope. No, that's not the point. He directly stated that they had studied the boundaries of the territorial interests of existing political entities, so they don't plan to take away anyone's territory. But the scale? What do you mean? Sinclair brought up a map of the galaxy in the communication window, and then marked an approximate region of space on it. According to him, the outpost will occupy 1/13 of the galaxy. Damn it. Exactly, Senator, exactly. Commander Sinclair. After a few seconds of intense thought, Kingsley made a decision. As soon as possible, send me all the information you have about the new commander. His ship, a recording of his speech at the Babylon 5 Council. In a word, the maximum amount of information. "I will," Sinclair nodded. "So, now let's move on. Is the ship still at the station?" "Yes, Senator. Commander Sinclair, this is Lieutenant Susan Ivanova." The communicator on Jeffrey's hand suddenly beeped. "Excuse me, Senator." The officer brought the device to his mouth. "Yes, Lieutenant." 5 Drazi cruisers have emerged from hyperspace and are heading towards the station on an attack course. 4 are aimed at our guest's ship, 1 at us. Damn it. "I'll be right there." The man jumped up, throwing on his uniform jacket as he went. "Senator, I'll contact you later." Sinclair literally flew out of the office, heading for the elevator. Here were the problems he had been dreading since Bale's arrival. And was it any wonder that the Drazi were the first to lose their patience? And now, because of this, he, the commander of an officially neutral station, would have to clean up the aftermath of this diplomatic scandal. And the words of the Goa'uld ambassador, that if someone decided to declare war on them, he would gladly listen to them, came to mind very sadly. Damn it! Excuse me! Move aside! The commander rushed down the corridor, trying to maneuver between the employees, but it didn't always work. Ivanova, report. Jeffrey almost ran into the door and... Oops! In the doorway, he almost crashed into the Goa'uld ambassador, who was leaving the station bridge with a welcoming smile as always. Oh, Commander Sinclair. Bal nodded affably, making way. A wonderful night, isn't it? Goodbye, Commander. The officer stood frozen in shock at the threshold of the room, observing the expressions of shock on the faces of Ivanova and the rest of the personnel on the bridge. What? Sinclair had to clear his throat to finish. What happened here, Lieutenant? What happened to the Drazi cruisers? Are they still attacking? No. Commander, Ivanova smiled wearily, leaning on the handrail at her workstation. There are no problems with the Drazis at the moment, as well as the Drazis themselves. What? Sinclair ran to the central terminal, reading the sensor readings, but after a moment he simply looked out the observation window. Near the bulk of Baal's ship, barely visible against the starry sky, 5 groups of debris swarmed in space, all that remained of the ships that had attacked the Huttak. What the hell? What are we going to do, Commander? Baal. What was he doing here? Here. He just came to the bridge. Ivanova gradually regained her composure. For a while he just stood there and watched as they shot at his ship, as if it didn't concern him at all. And then, one salvo from his ship. One. And the Drazi ships were destroyed. More details, Susan. Describe everything in detail. He came about 5 minutes after the Drazis started shelling. I didn't even notice him right away, only when he wished me good night. Then he said something about a great view and asked what was going on. He was looking out of the observation window as if he had come to the ballet. And then... The woman shook her head slightly, apparently still unable to accept what had happened. I said that I was trying to resolve the situation with the attack on his ship. He, a shrug, was surprised. I don't know. From his face, it looked like he didn't even consider the idea that they were trying to destroy his ship until the very end. And then his ship fired a salvo, more like a burst from one barrel, and the Drazis... Susan spread her arms to the sides, disappeared. All 5? Yes. 5 shots. 5 destroyed cruisers. Did he contact anyone? Did he take out any devices? Anything else? No, nothing. Ivanova's face frankly showed what she thought about this. I just turned my head to the overview screen. Oh. A very unpleasant itch appeared in Jeffrey's stomach. Somehow, until now, he had not had to think about the fact that Baal could be a telepath. Now we have to solve this problem too. Sinclair tiredly ran his palms over his face, as if Rigesh 3 and the new race weren't enough for us. Problems never come alone. Okay, Lieutenant, send out the rescuers. And I'll have to report to the senator during a conversation with whom you called me. But... The woman tried to say something. I know, but we have to check while there is at least some chance. And even if there is none. The officer slumped wearily as he left the bridge, heading back to his office, trying to walk as slowly as possible, involuntarily trying to delay the inevitable conversation. But Babylon 5 was, alas, not an infinite station, so the office came into view depressingly quickly. The man sat down in his chair and called the senator again, closing his eyes for a moment. Commander Sinclair. Senator Kingsley's voice was both alarmed and displeased. What happened there that you had to end the conversation so quickly? I apologize, Senator. There was some trouble with the Drazis. They attacked Lord Baal's ship. Drazi? Attacked the new ambassador's ship? Yes. And what was his reaction? None. He just stood and watched. What? Yes. Nikokoi watched with curiosity for some time as his ship was being fired upon, and then destroyed all the attackers with one salvo and went to sleep. And his ship? Not a scratch. Moreover, judging by his reaction, he didn't perceive it as an attack until he was told about it directly. Incredible. Senator, the commander sighed heavily. I myself know that this is incredible, but this most incredible thing is hanging under our windows, and its owner is waiting for the council's decision on his application. I really hope that the incident with the Drazi will be the only surprise, and now I need to know what our position will be. The senator was silent for almost a minute, thinking hard. The situation is complicated. We just finished one war. We would not like to get involved in a second one with the participation of an unknown enemy. So, he paused again. No excesses. As long as the claims of this empire do not in any way affect the interests of Earth, our decision will be, do not interfere. Do you understand, Sinclair? Let the other races decide for themselves what to do. Let them even fire the entire fleet at this ball. Do not interfere. If what is happening does not pose a danger to Babylon 5 or Earth, we remain neutral, at least until we learn more about the capabilities and technology of this race. We have had enough of the mistake with the Minbari. I understand, Senator. I hope the other members of the council will behave just as sensibly. In that case, good night, Commander. I'm waiting for your data. Good night, Senator. Sinclair disconnected the connection and leaned back in his chair. It's time to retire. The Centauri ambassador threw the bottle of Brevari at the wall of his cabin in a rage. Damn bureaucrats. A bunch of stupid, short-sighted morons. Ambassador Molari? An alarmed Weir came running to Londo's home at the noise, freezing on the threshold and looking at the traces of his boss's violent character. Several broken vases, a puddle of wine on the floor by the wall, a sword that had previously decorated the wall in the bedroom, now stuck into the table by almost a third of its blade. What happened? Our republic is rolling into the very depths of hell, Vir. Our ancient state, headed by noble, high-born, and simply the best. Molari literally spat out the words, jerkily gesturing with a goblet grabbed from the table. Representatives of their people is mired in bureaucracy and empty talk. The ambassador drank the rest of the Brevari in one gulp and threw it across the entire cabin. What happened? Londo? I've been in touch with our government. About the new ambassador, this. Londo waved his fingers in the air. Lord Baal. So what? What did they say? Are we going to take any action in connection with his statement to the council? They deliberated for 3 hours. 3. And what did they decide? Nothing. This useless gathering of bureaucratic pettifoggers and windbags decided nothing. The Centauri Republic cannot make such an important decision based on dubious facts. Molari spat, heading to the bar to pour himself another drink. Having drained a full goblet in one gulp, already his 5th that evening, he glared at Weir, leaning his back against the bar. They can't even make the simplest decision without comparing who has, longer pedigree. But what should we do? We have to. Centauri refrains from taking active steps towards the Goa'uld civilization. I said so. And it took me another 2 hours to get these old farts to at least vote for this. Where is the Republic heading? Where is this whole galaxy heading? The Centauri ambassador waved his hand wearily, sinking down onto the sofa, this time glaring darkly at the cup in his hand.